Hey guys. So my wife Sasha and I have owned a small ranch since last spring, and over the past year we've experienced all 4 seasons out here. Today I want to share why this place is, well, pretty special. About a year ago, Sasha and I made the move to rural Idaho when I landed what is essentially my dream job, working for the county. At first, we found this little rundown rental in town where the county seat is, a bustling metropolis of about 3,500 people. The whole county only has around 13,000 full-time residents. Initially, we weren't sure how long we'd stick around. It's by far the smallest town we've ever lived in, and honestly, it was a bit more blue-collar and conservative than what we were used to. But over time, we fell in love with the place. Both of us are into hiking, camping, and skiing, and I'm an avid hunter and angler. So, being surrounded by stunning mountains, forests, and rivers full of trout really helped us settle in. Sasha had a great remote job, with only occasional trips to her office in Jackson, which was actually a nice break from the isolation of living in such a small mountain town. We don't have kids, just our dog Dash. We're both in our early 30s, and we had stable incomes for the first time. So we started thinking about buying a property. The area was starting to grow, especially with wealthy people buying hobby ranches as the billionaires pushed the millionaires out of Jackson Hole. I was also able to qualify for a fantastic finance plan through the VA. That amazing mortgage option, plus having college paid for, were the best things I took away from my 6 years in the Marine Corps. So we thought, why not? Let's look for a place to call our own. Our realtor called us one morning last spring when the property we now own first got listed. She knew we were looking for something with 4 to 5 acres and was thrilled about the price, saying we needed to see it ASAP and get an offer in. That same afternoon, we met at her office, and during the drive out to the place, she explained that it was a 40-acre ranch owned by a family trust somewhere back east. No one had lived on the land for over a decade. The family matriarch had passed away last year, and the trust had remodeled the house to sell it along with the rest of the assets to split among her kids and grandkids. Long story short, the sellers were motivated, and this place was going to sell fast. I'll never forget the first time we drove up the long driveway from the county road and saw the property. It was absolutely breathtaking. And honestly, every time I drive up now, it still feels that way. The house sits on a little hill surrounded by meadows and aspen trees. Spring was in full bloom. Everything was lush and green. There were wildflowers and birds everywhere. The whole place just felt alive. The house itself was a lot smaller than we'd originally been looking for. Only about 900 square feet, smaller than some apartments we lived in after college. But it had this massive porch, a fenced-in yard with big cottonwood trees, a separate garage, a couple of storage sheds, and an old but functional hay barn with a few horse stalls. What really stood out, though, was the view. Everywhere you looked, the scenery was just stunning. That's honestly why we fell in love with it so fast. Outside the yard, there are about 25 acres of meadows with a pond and a creek running through it. Then, there's about 15 acres of pine forest sitting above the house. And the best part? Our eastern neighbor is a national forest that's literally 3 times the size of Rhode Island. Sasha and I both loved the property, but she was absolutely over the moon, practically glowing with excitement. I don't have much family, and honestly, Sasha's my whole world. After getting out of the Marines, I went straight from combat deployments to living in freshman dorms at a huge state university as a pretty messed up 24-year-old. Let me tell you, wouldn't recommend it, Marines. Seriously, don't do it. It was a disaster. Emotional isolation, crippling social anxiety. I spiraled fast, throwing myself into a whirlwind of violence, whiskey, and bad decisions. I was basically a walking time bomb until I met Sasha. She saved me, no question about it. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I think about that every single day. So when I saw her so happy about the ranch, that was it for me. That was all I needed. The listing price was a bit higher than we planned on spending, but we decided to go for it. I mean, with the VA loan and all, it made sense. And hey, it was still cheaper than what our friends were paying for houses back in our hometowns. So we said, screw it, let's do this. We made an offer, and by 6:30 the next morning, our realtor hit us up with the news. They accepted our lowball offer. No counter. Just like that, we were under contract. A few weeks later, after a clean inspection and title report, we closed the deal. We moved in that very same night. We didn't even have real furniture yet, so we cooked pasta on a camping stove, ate on fold-up chairs, and crashed on an air mattress in the living room. We didn't care. We were just buzzing with excitement. Sasha and I spent those early days dreaming up all kinds of wild ideas for the property. I'm talking ski jumps, an archery course, a tiny home village for guests. Oh, and definitely some wine-drinking patios along the creek. Those first 2 weeks flew by in a blur of unpacking, planting gardens, and settling in. Our dog Dash, he was an absolute heaven. We fenced in about an acre for him, but beyond that, it was like his personal kingdom. I'll never forget how Sasha looked during those first few weeks, full of excitement and this deep sense of peace. By the beginning of our 3rd week, we figured we were getting close to that point where not introducing ourselves to the neighbors would just be plain rude. Now, there were a few houses scattered around, but we only had one real neighbor nearby, an older couple, Dan and Lucy, who lived on a 300-acre ranch to the north. Our realtor told us they were really nice folks, so we made a couple of pies, hopped in the truck, and drove over to meet them. Their driveway stretched about a quarter-mile from the gate, winding through pastures dotted with clusters of ponderosa pines and lazy cows, before ending at a cozy-looking house. It felt like a home, good vibes, well-tended gardens, and a killer view of the mountains. When we pulled up, we saw this older guy standing in the driveway. He turned, waved, and walked over slowly with a big smile. "You must be my new neighbors," he said. "Yes, sir. I'm Harry, and this is Sasha." Dan, who looked to be in his early 70s but still had this spry, sharp energy about him, shook my hand. His hands were rough, like buffalo leather, and his face looked like it had been carved out of wood. Strong and full of stories. As we were talking, a woman about the same age came out of one of the barns. She had this presence about her like she'd seen it all, and nothing could really surprise her anymore. She introduced herself as Lucy. We all exchanged the usual pleasantries, and they told us about how they'd owned their ranch since the early 80s, and how their 3 kids had all grown up and moved to Boise with families of their own. They also mentioned how the family that built our place only ever came out once or twice a year to hunt, so they were pretty excited to finally have full-time neighbors. They loved the pie, and we left with that classic, "Hey, call us if you need anything," which they immediately returned. Just as it seemed like we were wrapping things up with a friendly "till next time" handshake, Dan pointed at me with a little smirk and asked, "Infantry? Is it that obvious?" I chuckled, glancing down at myself. Dan slapped his knee, laughing. "I can spot it a mile away. Army or Marines?" "I was in the Marine Corps, sir. 0311. A grunt, huh? But wait, did you say was? I thought the only way out of the Corps was in a pine box." Ah, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that one. Yeah, they say once a Marine, always a Marine. But they also told me you fine taxpayers would cover my college tuition, so I jumped ship and never looked back. That line always gets a laugh from older folks, and Dan and Lucy were no exception. "Ha, good one. I was with the 101st, did a tour in Nam, 70 to 71. I've heard that was quite the time and place to be a paratrooper, sir." "That it was, son, that it was. Did you make it over to Afghanistan or Iraq?" "I made a couple of cameos in Afghanistan." Dan grinned, but it was a bit forced, almost apologetic. "I've heard that was quite the place to find yourself as a Marine." "It was certainly colorful, sir." "I'm sure it was." Dan's smile faded, replaced by a more thoughtful look. I could tell he was about to shift the conversation. "Listen," he started. "For the last 10 years, the family that owned your place before you paid us and some of our ranch staff to help manage the land, mostly just keeping the trees in order, grazing down the grass before fire season, checking the well and septic, that kind of thing. I've spent a lot of time out there riding and hunting over the years, so we know that land as well as anyone. We'd love to share some advice with you about managing the place, things that are really important. Maybe we could come by soon and walk the property with you?" Before I could even respond, Sasha, ever the social planner, jumped in. "That would be a huge help. We'd love to hear all your tips. How about tomorrow evening?" She squeezed my arm. Thanks, babe. Yeah, that works for me, Dan. Lucy, does 5 o'clock tomorrow work for you too? Sure, Lucy smiled. We'll swing by around 5. Thanks again for stopping by. I hope you two make a habit of it. With that, we hopped back in the truck and headed home. I shot Sasha a look. Don't even start whining about me making plans, babe. They seem sweet and their knowledge will be super helpful, okay? As usual, she was right. I know. You're right. I'll enjoy it. They seem like solid neighbors. You know, it's weird with other combat vets. Sometimes they're the only people I feel like I can really connect with. People who understand me. Other times they're the last people I want to see. It's tough to explain. The next morning, we decided to spend the day working on the fencing in the pastures. We were planning on getting some sheep soon to graze the grass down before fire season hit, and parts of the fence needed serious attention. It was a perfect spring day. Just me, Sasha, and Dash out on the land. You could feel summer in the air, like the long days and warm nights were just around the corner. Around 5 p.m., I spotted Dan and Lucy pulling up the driveway in their old F-250. We went out to greet them, and they spent the next hour walking us around the property, Dash happily trotting along beside us. They pointed out all sorts of stuff: the well pump, the nuances of the aquifer for irrigation, tips on taking care of the fruit trees, where the elk tended to break through the fence during their migration, the best spots for mushroom hunting, and even a few trees that they figured would die in the next year or two. It was clear they had a deep connection with the land. I was impressed, and honestly, a bit humbled. I wanted that kind of relationship with the place too. As we walked back toward the house, Lucy turned to Sasha and asked if she wanted to see where the wild asparagus grew in the pasture. Before Sasha could answer, Lucy looped her arm through hers and they headed off, laughing about something. It was probably one of the cutest things I've ever seen. Dan looked over at me. Mind if we sit on the porch for a bit, son? Not at all, sir. Want a beer? I grabbed a couple of beers and we sat down on the porch. That first sip of cold beer hit the spot. Dan took a long drink, then set his beer down and turned his chair to face me directly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, fingers intertwined, looking like he was about to say something serious. I waited as he took his time, looking down as if he was searching for the right words. Then he looked me dead in the eye, his gaze fierce. Listen, son. Everything we talked about earlier will help you manage this land, but there are a few other things I need to tell you. Things that are hard to explain, but you need to pay close attention. I can't stress this enough. These things are important. Do you understand? I couldn't help but smirk a little. It's kind of a reflex I have in awkward situations. But I respected Dan, so I put my beer down, met his gaze, and nodded. Yes, sir. I'm all ears. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound strange, maybe even a bit frightening, but you need to take me seriously. What I'm about to say could very well save your life. You need to listen like I'm an NCO who's been in country for a year, and you're a fresh boot straight off the plane. Normally, I'd think a military analogy like that was cheesy as hell, but I could feel how serious he was. I nodded again. I hear you, sir. Dan nodded back, then pulled some folded papers out of his jacket and held them up before placing them on the side table between us. Dan nodded, his expression dead serious as he leaned back, placing his elbows on his knees, eyes locked with mine. Good. You're going to need it in the summer, he said flatly. I raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was still pulling my leg or if he genuinely believed what he was saying. The spirit manifests differently in each season, he continued, and summer is the worst. When it shows itself in the summer, it takes the form of an animal, sometimes a large one, but it won't be any ordinary animal, you understand? It'll look wrong. Wrong how? I asked. Dan sat up a little straighter, eyes narrowing. It'll have too many eyes or too many legs. The fur might look off, or its movements won't seem natural. It might look like a deer, a wolf, or even a bear. But I guarantee you, whatever it looks like, it's not what it seems. If you see it, you need to shoot it. No hesitation. I blinked at him, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what I was hearing. Shoot it? Dan nodded, his face grim. Yes, you don't wait to see if it's real or not. If you hesitate, it'll be too late. That's how it gets you. It plays tricks with your mind, makes you doubt what you're seeing. But you can't give it the chance. Just shoot, and don't stop until you're sure it's down." I stared at him, my hand gripping my beer a little tighter. This all sounded like something out of a bad campfire story. But Dan wasn't laughing. His eyes held a look that told me he was dead serious. "And if I miss?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though my nerves were on edge. "You won't," Dan said, his voice firm. "You'll hit it if you don't let fear take over. But if by some chance it gets away, get inside. Stay there until morning. It won't come for you in the daylight. At least, not in the same way." I nodded slowly, still unsure if he was pulling my leg or if this was the strangest conversation I'd ever had. Dan leaned back again, taking another swig of his beer before continuing. "Just remember, in the summer, don't go wandering around after dark, especially near the tree line. The spirit likes to hang out there, waiting, and if you hear anything strange or feel like you're being watched, head back to the house immediately." There was a long pause as Dan let his words sink in. Finally, I nodded. "All right, Dan, I'll keep that in mind." "Several," I responded. "What caliber?" Dan asked. "Well, I've got a couple of 22s, a couple of 5.56s, a 30-30, a 308, a 30-06, a 7mm, and a few others." Dan raised his hands, nodding, and cut me off. "That's more than enough. Any of those will do fine. Just make sure to keep one near the front door at all times, maybe another in the garage, and always take one with you when you're working on the land. But as a Marine, living out here in bear and wolf country, I'm sure you're already on top of that." I nodded in agreement. "All right, now, in the summertime, the way the spirit manifests is what we call the bear chase. It only happens between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., and only when you're outside the house. We've never seen it start when we were indoors. When you're outside, you'll first hear a deep voice hollering, unless you happen to be looking in the right direction. If you look towards the voice, you'll see a man completely unclothed, running for his life, with a big black bear chasing him. He'll be yelling for you to help, begging you to save him. Now, listen closely. Do not let that man get close to you. This fence around the house seems to protect well enough. Based on what I've seen, he can't open gates, doors, or even climb over anything more than 3 feet high. But no matter where he appears, he'll come right at you. So if you can get inside the fence or behind something like a cattle fence or a large log, you should be safe. But if you get too close, you're in serious danger. I strongly recommend you shoot this man. If you don't, the bear will get him. And trust me, watching that man go through what happens next is not something you ever want to see." Dan took a sip of beer before continuing. "Don't worry about the bear, though. It's not a threat to you. As far as I can tell, it can't even make contact with you. The real danger is the man. If he gets near you or Sasha, he'll tear you apart. But he's not that fast, and neither is the bear. It's more like a jog. So when you hear the yelling, locate where it's happening, put some distance and a structure between you and the man, and shoot him. The bear will take care of the rest. Understand?" I was holding back laughter at this point, but the way Dan spoke so seriously made me take it in. I just nodded. "Got it. All right, now on to autumn. In my opinion, this one can be the most unsettling. We call it the scarecrow. It only happens 2 or 3 times in a season. But once is enough. It can only show up at night while you're asleep. You'll wake up one night and find what looks like a human-sized scarecrow within 20 or 30 yards of your house. It's made of burlap and canvas, stuffed with what feels like wet straw, and has a stitched, realistic-looking face. It's dressed in old pioneer-style clothing, sometimes a dress and bonnet, sometimes overalls and a straw hat. They weigh around 40 or 50 pounds, and you'll see it sitting or leaning casually somewhere, maybe on a bench, a stone wall, or even the porch steps. It's never hidden. It's like it wants to be found. When you find it, there's no life in it. You can poke it, and it'll just slump over. But here's the thing. You have to burn it. That's the only way to deal with it. They burn fast. Once they catch fire, they'll turn to ash in about 30 seconds. But you have to be careful because if you're within 20 yards of your home, when you set it on fire, it'll wake up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wake up, I thought. Yes, wake up. And when it does, it'll try to get inside your home and burn it down. That seems to be its goal. So you've got to move it first. Get it away from the house. Here's where things get strange. The scarecrow won't resist much when you start moving it, but after 5 to 15 seconds, it will come to life. It won't last long, but it'll try to grab your hand, stand up, or undo the rope you're using to drag it. I suggest using a rope to avoid touching it directly. Some of them are strong. Sometimes they'll even take a swing at you. But these moments only last a couple of seconds before it goes limp again. Move it, burn it, and it'll be gone for good. Dan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. There's something else you need to know. These things, they seem scared. It's like they know something's about to happen to them. When they move, even briefly, they can speak. It's not much, but you might hear them cry out a please don't or an oh no. It's unsettling, but you've got to stay focused. They need to be dealt with by sunset, the same day you find them. The safest way is to keep your distance, lasso them if you have to, and move them to a burn spot far from the house. Once they're there, they stop moving. After that, it's easy. Just a small fire will take care of everything. The only risk is trying to handle them too close to home. That's when they stay awake, and you definitely don't want that. Got it? I forced a chuckle, though Dan's tone had me uneasy. Got it. Move them away, burn them far from the house. My head throbbed slightly as I tried to process this bizarre advice. Dan nodded, finishing his drink in one long gulp. He took a deep breath, his demeanor shifting to something far more serious. Now, there's one more thing. This happens in winter. Most people don't experience it, but for you, I think you will. We call them the ghosts. They don't show up every year, and sometimes winters go by without a single appearance. But when they do, you'll know. He wiped his brow with a bandana and stared at the distant mountains. Then, almost reluctantly, he turned his intense gaze on me. Can I ask you something personal? He began, surprisingly polite for someone sharing such a strange tale. Sure, Dan, go ahead, I replied, curious despite myself. Have you ever been responsible for someone's death? The question caught me off guard, but I answered truthfully. Yes. More than one? Yes. All in Afghanistan? I nodded, my patience starting to wear thin. How many? 4 confirmed, maybe a few more. It's hard to say for sure. Why do you ask? Dan's face was unreadable as he continued. I thought I'd only killed 8 men in Vietnam until my first winter here. It turned out to be 12. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. The way the spirit manifests in winter, he explained, is through the people you've killed. They show up here on your land. It's like they've been drawn to you, given a way to find you. Lucy can't see them, and Sasha won't be able to either. But they can feel them. Sometimes Lucy even hears them. Dogs pick up on their presence too. Dan leaned forward, his voice lowering. Here's what happens. One day, you'll step outside and see them. A group of men standing somewhere on your property, maybe near the tree line or by the pond. At first, they keep their distance, almost like they're scared of you. But over time, they get closer. They'll start waiting for you by your front door or following you to your truck. You'll hear them outside your window at night. They're relentless. But here's the thing. They still carry something of their earthly personalities. One of the men I encountered in winter was someone I'd shot early in my deployment. He was gravely injured, and I tried to comfort him in his final moments. That didn't stop him from showing up here. Dan's voice softened, and a single tear traced down his weathered cheek. One of them respects me, I think. He doesn't act like the others, hangs back, watches, he even smiles at me sometimes. One year, I'm pretty sure he scared off a pack of wolves during lambing season. Strange as it sounds, there's almost a bond, a quiet understanding. Dan wiped his eye with the back of his hand. He took a deep breath and continued. They never stay too long, 15 days, maybe 26 at the most. But while they're here, there's nothing you can do to make them leave. And listen closely. If they get inside your house, they can hurt you. They can hurt Sasha. They'll do whatever they can to get in. But there's one way to keep them out: candles. Dan reached into his jacket and pulled out a 6-pack of tall candles, handing them to me. It doesn't matter what kind, but get the long-burning ones like these. You'll need one for each person you've killed, burning from sundown to sunrise. If it's 4 people, you burn 4 candles every night. Keep your dog inside too. They seem to fear dogs, so Dash will help protect you. But you have to stay strong. They won't leave until they're ready, and their presence, it'll push you to your limits. I couldn't help but shake my head. This was beyond strange. Dan, I need to check on Sasha and Lucy, I mumbled, standing up to excuse myself. Dan cut me off, his voice steady and firm. Son, Lucy's telling Sasha the same thing I'm telling you. Look. He pointed toward the creek. There, Sasha and Lucy were sitting together on a log, Dash splashing in the water nearby. From this distance, I could tell Sasha looked uneasy, and that unease lit something fierce in me. When Sasha feels scared, I feel protective. Violent, even. My blood surged, and I turned to Dan, ready to tell him to leave my property. But Dan had already closed the distance between us. His face was inches from mine, and his expression was one I recognized, a hardened look of someone who had seen far too much. Listen here, he said, his voice a low growl. I'm not trying to scare you, and I'm not playing games. What I'm telling you is real. You've got a new enemy now, Marine. You can dismiss everything I've said, but if you do, you're putting yourself and Sasha in danger. From one soldier to another, sit down, shut up, and listen. Please. His words, and that piercing look in his eye, gave me pause. I exhaled deeply, letting go of some of my anger. All right, Dan, what else do I need to know? Dan placed a hand on my shoulder. You and Sasha seem like good people. I want you to be safe here. This spirit, this presence, it's tied to this land. It doesn't have to be all bad if you respect the rules, but it's dangerous if you don't. As soon as this place feels like home to you, things will start. I reckon you'll see the light in the pond in a couple of weeks. When you do, start a fire and call us. We'll come over. But if you see the light and hear drums from the mountain, get Sasha in the truck and leave. Don't look back. As Dan finished, Sasha and Lucy walked up to the porch, arm in arm. Sasha's expression mirrored my confusion, while Lucy approached me with calm certainty. She took my hands in hers and said, Everything Dan told you is true. Please follow the instructions. We've written everything down. We'll check in on you regularly, if that's all right. I nodded, trying to hide my discomfort. Thanks, Lucy. It was nice meeting you both. Sasha and I need some time to process all of this. Dan and Lucy left soon after, leaving behind a stack of firewood, matches, and more candles. Sasha and I sat together on the porch, going over their story. Everything Lucy told Sasha matched what Dan had told me, and the notes they left confirmed it all. Sasha, ever in tune with the world's energies, was surprisingly open to the idea. They don't seem crazy, Will, she said, pouring another glass of wine. Why would they go to such lengths to tell us all of this if it wasn't important? Sasha sighed as I tried to rationalize everything. Sash, maybe they don't want neighbors and are just trying to scare us off, or maybe they're part of some local cult. Rural Idaho is known for weird stuff like that. She shook her head. Harry, they seem normal, and our realtor said they're respected in the community. Even your boss said he knows Dan and spoke highly of him. That was true. My boss, a level-headed guy with sharp instincts, rarely praised anyone unless he had good reason. If Dan was some kind of psycho, it would have been a surprise to hear someone like my boss vouch for him. And honestly, I liked Dan and Lucy, at least until their whole spirit speech. I guess we wait and see, I muttered. Maybe that springtime water light is just some battery-powered gadget Dan'll toss in the pond while we're at work. We laughed it off and agreed to let it go for now. It wasn't like we were going to pack up and move, just because our neighbors had some eccentric stories. We finished dinner, went to bed, and tried to get back to normal. The week passed without incident. We spent Saturday working in the yard and putting up the last of our decorations. The place was finally feeling like home. Sasha had plans to meet friends in town that evening, so I stayed back, grilled a steak for dinner, and settled onto the porch with a beer. Dash, our dog, sat beside me, his tail swishing as I pulled burrs out of his fur. That's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, it was there. A glowing yellowish ball of light, hovering a few feet under the surface of the pond. My heart skipped a beat and adrenaline surged through me as I stood up to get a better look. Dash followed my gaze, ears perked, hackles raised. There it was. I thought about taking a picture to send to Sasha, but decided against it. I didn't want to freak her out. Then another idea hit me. My .308 rifle was just inside, perfectly sighted and ready. Should I shoot it? Maybe I could end this whole ridiculous charade. But before I could move, I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. My instincts, honed over years of service, screamed at me. I turned toward the tree line behind the house. Dash noticed it too. He lowered his head and let out a low, rumbling growl. Whatever was watching us wasn't visible. I scanned the meadow for any sign of an animal, wolves, bears, coyotes, but there was nothing. The light in the pond moved. Not a ripple, not a splash, just a smooth, silent shift as if it were sliding through the water. It stopped, then moved again, this time closer. Dan's words echoed in my mind. If you see the light for the first time, just stop what you're doing and start a fire. If you don't, and you hear drums, get in the truck and leave, fast. Dash was still growling, fixated on the tree line. He'd never reacted like this before, even during hikes where we'd encountered bears. My chest tightened as my pulse quickened, each beat pounding in my ears. I found myself whispering to Dash, trying to calm both him and myself. Just get a fire started, I muttered. The light moved again. Every time I looked away and then back, it was in a different position. Was the darkness playing tricks on me? I'd spent enough time on night patrols and in hunting blinds to know how easy it was for the mind to lead you astray in low light. But this felt different. And deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. The light in the pond kept shifting. It was no subtle movement. Every time I blinked or glanced away, it reappeared in a completely different spot, often across the entire pond. I rubbed my eyes, trying to ground myself, but my body had other ideas. My hands were starting to go numb, the telltale sign of adrenaline coursing through me. Dan's words played on a loop in my mind. If you don't start a fire after seeing the light and hear drums from up the mountain, get in the truck and leave as fast as you can. I chuckled nervously, more to convince myself this was absurd than anything else. But my laugh came out jagged, almost panicked, and then that just made everything worse. My mind turned against me. What if you do hear drums? What then? The thought felt like a challenge, and I hated it. I was spiraling, stuck in a mental tug-of-war between disbelief and self-preservation. Starting a fire felt like admitting fear, like surrendering. Dash, my dog, whined, breaking my internal debate. He was staring at me, ears pinned back, his tail tucked low. "It's okay, buddy," I murmured, trying to sound calm. "We're fine." He didn't seem convinced. Dash backed up slowly, his eyes flicking toward the tree line. Then he bolted for the kitchen door, clawing at it desperately. I whipped my head around to the tree line. Nothing. Back to the pond. The light had moved again. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it, drowning out everything else. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, but I forced it down. I'd trained for high-stress situations. I'd been under fire. I'd seen men lose their grip in moments like this, and I'd learned how to hold on. I repeated the mantra I'd used back then, the one that kept me steady. Deep breath. It'll happen or it won't. If it does, you won't feel it. You're more dangerous than them. Move. Dash let out a frantic yelp, his nails scratching at the door as if something outside terrified him. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't logic, and it wasn't fear, it was instinct. A primal need surged through me, a desperate certainty that I needed fire. Not later, not soon. Now. It felt like a part of my soul demanded it. I moved without thinking, grabbing the hatchet and a handful of logs from the porch. My legs carried me inside in a blur, the door slamming shut and locking behind me. Dash barked wildly at the door, his fur bristling as he stared through the glass. Ignoring him, I rushed to the fireplace. Junk mail, fire starter matches, logs. I worked mechanically, stacking and crumpling paper, opening the flue, striking a match. I was so focused on the flames catching that I barely registered Dash's barking escalating. I glanced back. He stood rigid in the kitchen, barking furiously at the door we'd just come through. My stomach dropped. Dash never barked like that unless something or someone was close. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my rifle and storm outside. But my training kicked in again, overriding the chaos in my mind. Focus. Get the fire started. I struck one of the thick fire starter matches and held it under the papers, then lit another and another until the flames began to catch. As I watched the fire grow, my mind looped back to Dan's warning. When you see the light, start a fire immediately. A heavy sense of dread crept in as I worked to get the fire going. Grabbing the hatchet, I split some smaller strips of wood and fed them into the growing flames. The crackle of the fire and its warm glow began to ease my nerves. Dash, my dog, finally settled beside me, wagging his tail as if to say he approved of the effort. I scratched his head absent-mindedly, the tension in my chest beginning to subside. Dan's next instructions popped into my mind. Once the fire is steady, check to see if the light is gone. If it's still there, add more wood. I walked over to Sasha's desk, grabbed the written instructions Dan and Lucy had left, and scanned for the section labeled Springtime. The final lines hit me hard. If the light is gone, the spirit is gone. You can let the fire burn out and go about your business as if nothing happened. As if nothing happened. I shook my head, feeling my frustration bubble over. The absurdity of it all, me following some bizarre ritual to ward off a spirit, felt like a joke. But the relief I felt when the fire caught wasn't something I could ignore. With a deep breath, I walked toward the south-facing guest room window. I kept my eyes down until I reached the sill, then slowly looked out. The light was gone. The relief hit me like a wave. A strange, unshakable calm washed over me, as if a weight had been lifted off my chest. It was a physical sensation, an emotional release so profound I nearly laughed. Even Dash seemed to sense it. His tail wagged, and he waited patiently by the door to be let outside. I walked to the kitchen and dialed Dan and Lucy's number. The phone rang twice before Dan answered. Dan here. Hey Dan, it's Harry, I said, trying to keep my tone light. I saw the light in the pond tonight. Dan's reply came instantly, firm and unwavering. Did you start a fire? Is it burning now? Yeah, I started one as soon as I saw it. The light's gone now, so I guess your advice worked. No drumming either. In the background, I heard Lucy let out a muffled, "Thank God." Dan's voice softened. We're glad to hear that, Harry. Really glad. Is it all right if we stop by for a quick visit? Just want to make sure you're doing okay. Well, Sasha's out having dinner, but yeah, sure. Come on over. Great, we'll be there in a minute. Before he hung up, I hesitated. Hey, Dan. Just to be clear, once the light is gone, it's safe to go outside, right? Oh, absolutely, he assured me. You can usually feel when it's gone, just like you can see it's gone. I'm guessing you noticed that. I had. As much as I didn't want to admit it, I'd felt the change in the air when the light disappeared. Even Dash seemed to sense it. Hanging up the phone, I tried to shove the thought aside. I wasn't ready to accept all of this as real, not yet. If I was going to settle this once and for all, I needed to act. Grabbing my 30-30 rifle, a headlamp, a powerful spotlight, and a game camera, I loaded everything up. The game camera, motion-activated with night vision, was my secret weapon. If something truly paranormal was happening, I'd catch it on camera. Checking the camera's memory card as I stepped outside, I glanced back at Dash. He stayed inside, tail wagging, completely calm now. I nodded to myself, determined to get some answers. I scanned the tree line where Dash had been growling. Nothing. Steeling myself, I grabbed my gear and stepped outside, heading toward the pond. My rifle was shouldered, not because I truly expected trouble, but because it made me feel prepared. The cluster of small aspen trees near the pond provided a perfect vantage point. I strapped the game camera around one of the trunks, adjusting its angle to capture the entire area. After testing the setup, I stepped back, satisfied. If someone had planted that light in the pond, they'd need to retrieve it eventually, and I'd catch them in the act. Heading back to the house, I noticed the headlights of Dan and Lucy's truck winding down the road. I stashed my rifle behind the grill on the porch just as they pulled up. Well, hey there, Harry. Lucy called cheerfully as Dan opened the gate. She greeted me with a warm hug, which felt oddly comforting despite the strangeness of the situation. We're so glad you did the right thing, hun. So glad you listened to us. Dan dropped a bundle of firewood on the pile by the porch. Just in case it's a busy season for the lights, he added with a wry smile. I forced a polite nod but said nothing, the absurdity of his comment igniting my earlier frustration. Inside, Lucy looked around, beaming. Oh my, you two have really made this place feel like home. It's lovely. Thanks, I replied stiffly, still struggling with the surreal nature of the evening. Dan studied me. So, you still on the fence about all this? I shrugged, unable to put my tangled thoughts into words. Before I could muster a response, Lucy chimed in. It's okay if you don't believe it yet, Harry, but I'm sure you felt something tonight, didn't you? Her smile softened, but her words carried weight. Summer's coming. Once that season hits, you'll have no choice but to believe. Just promise me one thing. Next time you see the light, follow the steps exactly as you did tonight. Can you do that? I promise, I replied, weary but compliant. If it happens again, I'll light the fire. Good man, Dan said, clapping my shoulder. Lucy made me promise to call them if Sasha saw the light next time. And with that, they left. When Sasha got home, I recounted the events of the evening. She listened with wide eyes, hanging on every detail. Did you shoot at it? She asked knowingly. No, I sighed, but I thought about it. The next morning I was up early, armed with waders, a rifle, a shovel, and a rake. By sunrise I was at the pond, determined to uncover the source of the light. Checking the game camera, I found it had captured nothing unusual, just a skunk and a rabbit wandering through. Frustrated but undeterred, I spent over an hour combing every inch of the pond. Its deepest spot was only 5 feet, and I raked through the mud and debris with care. Sticks, muck, and algae, nothing remotely capable of producing light. By the time I trudged back to the house, drenched and covered in mud, my frustration had reached its peak. Sasha greeted me with coffee, her expression equal parts amused and triumphant. She had bought into Dan and Lucy's warnings from the start and had spent the past week researching similar phenomena. My inability to debunk the light only seemed to validate her belief. It's real, isn't it? She asked softly, a faint smile playing on her lips. I shook my head, unwilling to concede. I don't know what it is, but it's bothering me. A lot. She said nothing, and I sipped my coffee in silence, staring out at the now tranquil pond. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't shake it. And that was what unnerved me most of all. Sasha rested her hand on my shoulder as we sat on the porch. I looked over at her as she began to speak, her voice gentle yet concerned. Babe, sometimes there are things in this world that defy explanation, she said, trying to reassure me. Frustration welled up inside me and I snapped. Like what, Sasha? Name one thing you've experienced that even remotely compares to this. One thing that can't be explained by reason. That light, it was real. I felt it. Dash felt it. Name one actual, tangible event that proves something like this exists outside of the internet or a campfire story. Harry, please, she said, hurt evident in her voice. I'm just trying to help. Help how? I interrupted. Are we going to burn sage and crystals next? If this is real, Sash, it's not exciting or mystical, it's terrifying. Dan and Lucy didn't paint us some spiritual journey. They told us we'd be dealing with something dangerous. I stopped mid-sentence, realizing how far I'd gone. Sasha stood and gave me that look, the one that made it clear I needed to take a breath and apologize. I'm sorry, I said, sighing deeply. I shouldn't have yelled. I just don't know how to handle this. She softened. It's scary, but we have options. We can sell the place and leave if it's too much, or we can follow what Dan and Lucy said and see this through for the summer. Maybe we'll know for sure if it's real or not. The idea of leaving hadn't crossed my mind, but I wasn't sure if I could ignore the possibility of everything being a hoax. If something undeniable, like the bear chase Dan described, actually happened, there'd be no turning back. Sasha and I decided to go about our lives, but every evening I found myself staring out at the pond, half expecting something to appear. Weeks passed without incident. Life settled back into a rhythm, and we found ourselves enjoying the land more and more. One evening, as I was chopping peppers for dinner, I heard Sasha yell from the guest room, her voice sharp and urgent. Harry, the light, it's back. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a flush of heat and cold all at once. Dropping the knife, I ran to her side. She was standing by the window, her hand over her mouth. I followed her gaze to the pond and saw it, the same yellow light glowing faintly beneath the surface. Sasha grabbed my arm. It's moving, she said, her voice trembling. Sure enough, the light shifted several feet to the left. Before I could process my emotions, Sasha sprang into action. I'll get the wood. You bring Dash inside. She bolted for the woodpile while I called for the dog. Dash was near the edge of the yard, staring at the same spot in the tree line as before, his tail tucked and his hackles raised. I shouted, and he bolted back to the porch. By the time I got inside, Sasha had already started building the fire. I've got this, she said firmly, her determination shining through. Despite my nerves, I couldn't help but admire her calm under pressure. Dash barked at the porch door, clearly still uneasy, but Sasha stayed focused. Within minutes, the fire roared to life. As the flames crackled, Sasha turned to me. "I feel it, do you?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's something." We went to the guest room to check the pond. The light was gone. That overwhelming sense of relief washed over us again, leaving Sasha beaming. "Do you feel that? It's incredible," she said. I had to agree. It was like an invisible weight had been lifted. Later, Dan and Lucy came by. Sasha eagerly shared her experience with Lucy, and I stepped outside for a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years. Dan joined me, and we sat in silence for a while. Finally, he broke the quiet. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this," he said. "I know it's not easy, and it's not fair, but I'm here if you ever need anything." I let a solid 10 seconds pass before exhaling and saying, "Yeah, this is uncomfortable." "Sure is," Dan replied with a nod. We lapsed into silence again. I finished my smoke, crouched at the edge of the porch, and ground the cigarette butt into the dirt. When I turned, Dan had made his way to the railing. He leaned casually, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, gazing up at the moon. He inhaled deeply, savoring the cool night air like it was a rare vintage. "Summertime's just around the corner," he said, nodding to himself. "Nights like this, you can really feel it, and remember," he added, casting a serious glance my way, "spring's the easy one." The light in the pond appeared 3 more times before the season changed. Each time, Sasha and I were home together. It seemed easier to handle with each occurrence, less startling, less unsettling. Even Dash, our dog, seemed to pick up on the routine. By the time May came to a close, we were finally settling in and turning our attention to the next challenge Dan and Lucy had ominously called the bear chase. The descriptions they'd given were intense, borderline absurd, but Sasha took them seriously. And deep down, I felt the weight of it too. Despite my skepticism, I couldn't ignore the bizarre reality of the pond lights. Still, my mind rebelled against entertaining another inexplicable phenomenon. One unproven mystery at a time, right? Sasha worked from home most days, so one evening we sat down to review Dan and Lucy's handwritten instructions for dealing with the bear chase. We decided it was smart to have a plan, just in case this madness unfolded while I wasn't around. Here's an excerpt from their notes. "You'll usually hear the man screaming before you see him. First step, locate him. He'll be running directly at whichever person is nearest to him when he manifests. He always has a 40-yard lead on the bear, and neither gains or loses ground unless there's an obstacle. Second step, find a structure to place between you and the man. He cannot open doors, climb fences taller than 3 to 4 feet, or break through solid materials like wood or glass. The fence around your yard and house is sufficient. If you're outside the fence, crawl under or jump over any livestock fences. He cannot cross these. Getting in a vehicle is also a good option. Once you're behind an obstruction, he will stop, cry, and plead, but the bear will get him. He will appear desperate, but don't let him near you. He wants to hurt you. The bear, however, is harmless to you and your animals. We strongly suggest shooting the man before he gets close. Allowing him near is very unsafe. After watching him be taken by the bear a few times, it will seem less strange. He dies like any other man. If you shoot him, the bear will drag him away." Even after reading it dozens of times, Sasha and I couldn't help but shake our heads in disbelief. Anyone reading such a thing would likely dismiss it as the ramblings of an unhinged mind. And yet, the fear of this scenario playing out while Sasha was alone was enough to make me take it seriously, at least for now. We approached it like any other wildlife threat. We'd already made plans for handling grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, or mountain lions. This was no different, right? There was one line I absolutely refused to cross: shooting some guy who happened to run onto our property while being chased by a bear. First, I still wasn't convinced any of this was real. Second, our land bordered a national forest with well-used trails nearby. Thousands of hikers, campers, hunters, and photographers passed through those trails each season. Real bears existed here, after all. If this manifestation wasn't what Dan and Lucy claimed, I wasn't about to risk taking a shot at an innocent person. There's always a slim possibility that a real person might end up being chased by an actual bear onto our property. Considering this, I wasn't about to create a rule where strangers fleeing predators would automatically be treated as threats. That was just insane. Sasha and I had talked this through extensively. She was decent with firearms and could handle a shotgun or a .22 rifle fairly well. For safety, we agreed on a few basic rules. No headphones while outdoors to ensure we'd hear anything unusual, and if this bizarre bear chase scenario ever actually occurred while she was alone, she'd get herself and Dash inside the house, lock up, and arm herself with the .22. Dash, unfortunately, would be left outside if it came down to it. Once secured, she'd wait it out until the bear resolved the situation. Dan and Lucy continued to visit regularly, bringing fresh-baked bread or sharing tools they thought might be helpful. While their supernatural warnings added an undeniable layer of stress to our lives, there was no denying they were excellent neighbors otherwise. Sasha even began joining Lucy on her afternoon walks into the national forest. They'd chat, look for mushrooms, and discuss life. Lucy opened up about their 3 adult children and the unique challenges of raising kids in a place surrounded by things. In early June, Sasha had to spend a week in Jackson Hole for work. It was her first extended trip since our move. She left on Friday to enjoy the weekend with old friends, and I was looking forward to a few quiet days of solo work around the property, starting with clearing years of debris from the creek bed. On Saturday morning, I fed Dash, grabbed coffee and breakfast, and loaded up the wheelbarrow with tools. As I was getting ready, Sasha called to check in. "Don't forget," she said. "Forget what?" I asked. "The plan. The bear chase plan. It applies to you too, not just me. Promise me you'll have a rifle with you and stay alert today." "Christ. I promise, babe. I was gonna bring one anyway. The real bears are awake and hungry after their winter naps." I reached for my trusty 30-06 hunting rifle, but hesitated, my eyes landing on my custom-built 5.56 carbine. After leaving the service, I'd built it to mimic my M4 from Afghanistan. Holding it now felt like shaking hands with an old friend. Its pristine condition was almost comical compared to the battle-scarred weapons of my past. I grabbed a mag, loaded the rifle, and dropped it onto the wheelbarrow. "Let's give you some character, darling," I muttered. For the next 5 hours, Dash and I worked on clearing the creek. The spring runoff made the icy water refreshing under the hot sun. Dash played joyfully in the stream, chasing grasshoppers. Around 2 p.m., I climbed a small rocky outcrop overlooking the creek to take a break. Sitting in the sun, I chugged water, devoured my sandwich, and absent-mindedly cleaned dried mud from Dash's paws. Suddenly, Dash bolted upright, startling me. His ears pricked toward the southeast, the direction of the national forest. My first thought, absurd as it was, "Is it the naked guy?" I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. The stream and chirping crickets were the only sounds around. Still, I found myself frozen, senses on high alert as I strained to catch anything unusual. I stood up, and Dash looked up at me. I grabbed a stick from the grass, held it near his nose, smiled at him, and then threw it down the slope toward the wheelbarrow by the stream. He didn't move. He didn't even track the stick with his eyes. His gaze was locked on me, then he looked back to the tree line. That's when adrenaline rushed through me. I've had Dash for 6 years, and he's always been obsessed with fetching. There's never been a time when he didn't chase after something thrown. He could be asleep, and if something's thrown, his instincts take over. But now, he wasn't moving. That meant something serious had his attention. I looked back at the tree line. "What is it, buddy?" Dash glanced at me, and then back at the forest, lowering his head but keeping his eyes level. That was his signal to pay attention to something dangerous, and this time I did. I ran toward the wheelbarrow where I'd left my rifle. I yelled for Dash to follow me. He reached the stream first and froze, looking toward the southeast. When I touched the rifle, my muscle memory kicked in. Sling over my shoulder, magazine in, charging handle pulled back, and the scope to my eye in one smooth motion. I scanned the tree line, and then it happened. The crickets went silent. It wasn't just a few crickets, it was almost all of them, dead quiet. I had never heard that before. Then I heard a yell. Panic was clear in the tone. My heart rate spiked. I backed up, rifle ready, and shouted for Dash to follow. The stream ran another 35 yards before it entered a culvert, and I was headed toward the fence line to cross into the pasture. For a moment, a thought passed through my mind about Dan's warning, but it was interrupted by a shout of "Help!" I was close to the fence now, and Dash still hadn't moved, barking towards the sound, muscles tensed, his posture low and aggressive like a coyote. I shouted again for Dash to come, and this time he obeyed. I sprinted for the fence. As I reached the rise leading up to the driveway, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a naked man waving his arms. My gut clenched. I quickly tossed Dash over the fence and jumped after him. When I looked back, I saw him. A man running through the field, heading toward the opposite side of the stream. He looked a little older than me, maybe 38 or 40, with a short beard and sandy brown hair. His feet were bloody, and he was naked, just as Dan had said. He was running straight at me, eyes locked on mine through the scope. He looked desperate, exhausted, and terrified. I could hear him more clearly now. "Help! Please! It's gonna kill me, sir, please! Please help!" I couldn't believe it. This was real. Dash was going wild, barking like a fiend. Then I saw the bear behind him. I quickly checked it with my scope. It looked like any other black bear I'd seen before. About 400 pounds, male, but nothing unusual. What struck me, though, was how it wasn't charging at full speed, which black bears usually do. I switched back to the man, who was splashing through the creek, glancing back and forth from me to the bear. I could see tears in his eyes. "Please, sir, please don't leave me to die. Please help me, please." My mind was a chaotic whirl. I should shoot the bear. Just shoot it. What if this is real? What if I let someone get mauled? The man was almost out of the stream, and the bear was positioning itself in a perfect spot for me to get a clean shot. That's when I had an idea. There was a wheelbarrow full of tools right in front of him. A shovel, a pickaxe, and a rock bar. If I were being chased by a bear, there's no question. I'd go straight for one of those tools. I yelled to the man, "Grab the shovel, grab the rock bar. Dude, grab one and defend yourself. It's a black bear, you're supposed to fight back. Hit it, fight back." He was close enough to hear every word, but he didn't stop pleading. He ran right past the tools. I couldn't believe it. "Dude, what the hell?" My heart sank. Dash was snarling. The man was still crying and begging. "Please, sir, please, just help me. Help me, please." His voice was desperate and endless. I couldn't speak. My breath was shallow. I instinctively fell back on my combat mantra. Deep breath, move, deep breath, move. I grabbed Dash by the collar and dragged him up the driveway. I kept yelling at the man. "Why aren't you fighting back? Why didn't you fight?" I wanted a response. I wanted something. But he just kept pleading, his words the same over and over, as if on a loop. It felt unnatural, like he wasn't even processing what I was saying. I tried again, shouting, "Tell me your name and I'll pull you over the fence. Tell me your name, I'll kill the bear. Tell me your name, man." But he didn't respond. His gaze was vacant, his pleas relentless. The man was so close now, I had my rifle trained on his chest. Dash was barking less but still growling, his eyes locked on the man. I shouted for Dash to heal, and he did. The man reached the fence and I could hear him weeping, barely able to speak. "Please help me over the fence. Please don't let me die like this." And that's when it happened. The bear rose up behind him, its claws sinking into his shoulder, tearing through the muscle like paper. It grabbed his neck with its jaws, and I saw the man's eyes widen in pure terror. The bear yanked him back, pulling him to the ground. The man screamed, his body thrashing in agony as blood poured from his neck, soaking his chest. The man tried to fight back, clawing at the bear's face, but it just dragged him further, ripping into his flesh. His screams escalated into higher pitches, the raw sound of pain and fear. The bear's claws tore through his shoulder as it dragged him further back, biting into his ribs. The man collapsed onto the ground, his body trembling in agony as he tried to crawl toward me, but the bear continued its merciless attack. Then I saw the bear behind him. Through my scope, it appeared as any black bear I had encountered before. Around 400 pounds, male. But nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't charging at full speed, as black bears often do. But that didn't necessarily make it less dangerous. I switched back to the man, who was now splashing through the creek, glancing back at me and then at the bear. I could see his eyes filled with tears. "Please, sir, please don't leave me. Please help. Help me." My thoughts were frantic. Should I shoot the bear? What if this is real? What if I let this person get mauled? The man was almost out of the stream, and the bear was in a position where I could easily get a clean shot. That's when an idea crossed my mind. The man was about to pass right by a wheelbarrow full of tools. There was a shovel, a pickaxe, and a rock bar. I thought to myself, if I were being chased by a bear, I'd grab one of those tools to defend myself. Without hesitation, I yelled at him, "Grab the shovel, grab the rock bar, dude, defend yourself, fight back." He didn't listen, didn't stop to pick up any of the tools. He just kept running, passing right by the wheelbarrow. I couldn't believe it. What the hell, man? My stomach twisted in frustration. Dash was barking, still focused on the man. The man was now about 25 yards from me, pleading desperately, "Sir, please, help me please." I couldn't speak. My breath was shallow. I dragged Dash up the driveway, yelling, "Why aren't you fighting back? Why didn't you grab the shovel?" I wanted an answer, something, anything that made sense. But he just kept pleading. It didn't feel real anymore. His words were the same over and over, almost as if he wasn't even listening to me. It was like he had a script he couldn't deviate from. As the man reached the fence, I screamed at him, "Tell me your name. I'll pull you over the fence. Tell me your name and I'll shoot the bear. Please, just tell me your name." But again, he didn't respond. His gaze was vacant. The man was so close now, only a few feet away. I had my rifle trained on him, my finger almost pulling the trigger, but I couldn't do it. He was barely coherent, a mess of pleading and tears. Just as he reached the fence, I saw it. The bear rose up behind him and slammed its claws into his back, digging deep. I could see the blood spill out of him, his screams now reaching a new level of horror. He struggled, desperately grabbing at the bear's face, but the bear was too strong. With one last violent shake, the bear tore into his neck, snapping it with a sickening crack. The man went limp, his body falling to the ground. The bear let the man's body drop and licked the blood from its paws, then turned toward me. For a moment, it stared at me with a cold, calculating gaze, and I thought for a split second that it might come for me. But it didn't. Instead, the bear nodded. Yes, nodded, at Dash. My dog, who had been focused on the man, responded with an even faster wag of his tail. Then the bear turned and walked back to the man's body, grabbing it by the arm and dragging it away, leaving behind a trail of blood and intestines. I couldn't take my eyes off the bear as it moved, its claws dragging the body along. It was as if time had slowed down. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. The whole scene felt unreal. I was snapped back to reality when I felt Dash's tongue on my hand. I looked down at him, and that's when I realized I'd been standing there in shock. Tears were streaming down my face, and my rifle had dropped to the ground, hanging by its sling. I bent down, holding Dash in my arms. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I took a vacation day on Friday so I could be home when Sasha returned in the afternoon, and to begin building the sun-rain shed for the sheep that Dan and Lucy were going to let graze on our pastures. We decided to place it in the woods above the house, between a few trees where the sheep would spend the hottest part of the day. Dan had dropped off most of the materials the week before, so we had already trucked them up to the building site. Friday morning, I packed the wheelbarrow with tools, grabbed my rifle, and brought Dash along as I headed up there to start the work. Around 10 a.m., I was up on a ladder, securing a truss, when I noticed Dash slowly rise from where he had been lying next to the tarped pile of lumber. Without a second thought, I was on the ground and slinging my rifle in 5 seconds flat, following Dash's gaze and listening intently. I didn't hear anything at first, so I looked back at the dog. "What do you hear, buddy?" He was in his something's off posture, so I quickly decided we'd go into full defense mode. I started walking fast toward the gate to the fenced yard, calling Dash to follow me. Just as we got near the gate, Dash froze, lowered his head, and let out a low growl toward the eastern property boundary. Then I heard it, a man's voice, yelling in desperation. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my cool. I grabbed Dash by the collar and hauled him through the gate, shutting it behind us. I jogged up to the house for a better view of the eastern property line. I didn't need to use my scope to see the disturbance. Then a naked man broke through the forest, flailing his arms and screaming for help. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and was surprised by the wave of emotion that hit me. Rage. The panic quickly faded, replaced by fury. I felt it, and I welcomed it. I was furious. I hated this man, this spirit, this land, the idea of Sasha being in danger here, everything. The world around me started to turn red. I took a few deep breaths to regain control and focused on the situation. The man was crying, begging, waving his arms, just like before. Same man, same frantic gestures. But now the manipulation behind his act had lost its power. As I walked to the corner of the fence, I realized I wanted this spirit to feel real fear, real pain. I wanted to make it understand that I wasn't going to be manipulated. I needed another look at the man. I wanted to see if I could discern something else, something deeper, from whatever was behind the facade. He was about 45 yards away, and I fought to block out his pleading as he jogged through the meadow toward the fence. I needed to see his true self, without any distractions. I needed to see the spirit for what it really was. As he got closer, about 10 feet away, he slowed down, panting. His fingers gripped the chain-link fence and his face was buried in his hands as he sobbed and begged. What did this thing want? Why was it doing this, playing this game? I didn't know what possessed me to do it, but in that moment, with only 7 to 8 seconds before the bear arrived, I made a decision. I lowered the rifle's barrel and took a step closer to the man. Standing just inches from his face, I locked eyes with him, leaned in, and said, "This land is mine now. I took it from you, and you'll never, ever get it back." I spat on his feet, looked back into his eyes, and forced out the most provocative, cocky grin I could manage. To my surprise, his whole demeanor shifted instantly. The panic, sadness, and terror drained from his face, replaced by an expression of pure emotional detachment, like a mask had been ripped off. He looked past me, his gaze shifting westward. The bear, roughly 15 feet behind him, was preparing to attack. I saw the man's forehead furrow slightly, his expression turning confused, almost curious. It was as though something clicked, as if he'd just come to a sudden realization, like he had finally woken up and understood where he was. He glanced back at me with a hint of urgency in his face, and then it appeared, a flash of anger. And then I shot him. A single bullet right through his left tear duct, 2 seconds before the bear would have grabbed him. His head snapped back, fingers losing their grip on the chain-link fence, and a spray of pink mist, skull fragments, and brain matter exploded across the front of his body, glistening in the morning sunlight. His head lolled back, leaving his left eye and nose destroyed, while his right eye nearly popped out, but held on for a moment. His jaw twitched, blood spilling from his mouth as his body crumpled. The bear turned its gaze from the lifeless body, locking eyes with me. I held its stare, but the bear quickly looked past me to dash. I followed its gaze. Once again, the bear nodded to my dog, then returned its focus to the body. It bit into the corpse's shin and dragged it away. When Sasha came home, I told her everything. Every detail, except for what I had said to the man before I shot him. For some reason, I felt like that was something just between him and me. She understood why I kept it to myself, but insisted that I never do that again, which I promised. We walked through the entire experience, discussing the first encounter as though it were a movie. Then the second, where remnants of the man's blood and brains still stained the ground outside our fence, a grim reminder of that morning's events. Sasha called Lucy, and both she and Dan came over. I found myself explaining everything once again. They both reassured me that it sounded pretty standard. When I asked about the bear's behavior toward the dog, they shared that the bear had acted similarly when it encountered their horses. The animals were terrified, but when the bear arrived, it had a calming effect. Lucy explained, "I believe the bear brings balance, equilibrium. If the dark spirit gets a hold of the man, the good spirit comes through the bear." As summer wore on, it happened 3 more times. The next encounter came a month later in early July. I was in the shower while Sasha worked in the garden. Suddenly, I heard her yell for me. I rushed out of the house, assuming the naked man was on his way, panic-stricken and chaotic as always. I barked at her to make sure the gates were secured. "Of course, I already did that," she replied, looking at me like I was a child. God, she was solid. I grabbed my rifle and rushed outside, spotting the man near the pond. I braced my rifle on the porch pillar, waiting for him to turn toward the house. When he did, I fired a shot straight into his chest, right between the neck and the ribs. He crumpled to the ground. The rifle felt perfect in my hands. We stood there, watching the bear glance up at us for a moment, or perhaps at our dog, before it turned and dragged the body away. Sasha was mesmerized, and she asked me all about what would happen if the man got any closer. We spent the next while talking through the first two encounters again, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become our life. The fourth encounter happened about 3.5 weeks later, in early August, and, oddly enough, I wasn't there for it. I came home from work that evening and noticed Dan and Lucy's truck parked in the driveway. As I walked up and passed through the gate into our yard, I saw them all on the porch. Dan, Lucy, Sasha, and Dash. Something felt off. Sasha had this mixture of guilt and satisfaction on her face, and Dan and Lucy looked equally strange. What's going on, guys?" I asked. Sasha stood up and said, "I did it. I killed the naked man. It happened around lunchtime." I immediately snapped at her. "Sash, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me?" She held up a hand and said, "Babe, don't even start. You didn't tell me for a damn week after your first encounter. I just wanted to let you finish your workday without freaking out, all right?" She had a point. Turns out her encounter was a lot like mine, but she was already outside when it started. It had been a gusty day, and the trees were rustling loudly. Sasha said that she and Dash heard the man at the same time. She threw Dash inside, grabbed the .22 rifle, set up in a comfortable shooting position at the outdoor table, and waited for him to reach the fence. As soon as he slowed down, she said, "I shot him right in the forehead." She was proud of herself, and honestly, so was I. Dan and Lucy poured praise on her composure and decision-making, repeating for the 100th time that summer, "Getting behind that fence? That's what's important." They were like strange grandparents, in their own way. The fifth and final encounter occurred on a late August evening. Sasha was inside, and I had just returned from a short hike up the mountain into the national forest. I was nearing the pond with Dash when he froze. I trusted his instincts more than ever, so I looked in the direction he was focused on, but didn't see anything. I started jogging toward the gate around the yard. When I was about 20 yards from the gate, I heard the man screaming. I had to double back to grab Dash's collar to get him to follow me. He was really itching for a fight with the naked bastard. Once we were through the gate, and I made sure it was closed, I turned to see the familiar, chaotic scene unfold. I had gone hiking with my .44 revolver holstered at my side, with a can of bear spray as backup. I wasn't expecting anything, but as I walked toward the south fence, I made sure my revolver was fully loaded, snapping it shut. Dash started barking furiously as we got closer, and Sasha ran out onto the porch, wide-eyed. "Harry, what is it?" she asked. I waved and pointed to the man in the distance. "He showed up right when I got back, but it's all good, we're good." Sasha came down to stand about 20 feet behind me, holding Dash by the collar. We exchanged a nervous grin. She said, "Ever expect to be dispatching naked ghosts before supper, babe?" We both laughed, trying to ease the tension, but no matter how much we joked, the man's screaming and pleading still made my heart race. I hated him. Or more accurately, I hated whatever was controlling this pathetic, repetitive spectacle. I wanted to take control, to make it feel real fear. I needed to see what was really behind this, to bully it. He slowed down, reached the fence, and pressed his face between his hands, begging again. I ignored him, walking up close. Sasha shouted from behind me, "Babe, stop! Shoot him!" I smiled, forcing myself to speak. "Hey, bud, I know you're in there. I gotta tell you something." I leaned in closer. "This land is mine now. I took it from you." The fourth encounter happened about 3.5 weeks later, in early August, and, oddly enough, I wasn't there for it. I came home from work that evening and noticed Dan and Lucy's truck parked in the driveway. As I walked up and passed through the gate into our yard, I saw them all on the porch. Dan, Lucy, Sasha, and Dash. Something felt off. Sasha had this mixture of guilt and satisfaction on her face, and Dan and Lucy looked equally strange. What's going on, guys?" I asked. Sasha stood up and said, "I did it. I killed the naked man. It happened around lunchtime." I immediately snapped at her. "Sash, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me?" She held up a hand and said, "Babe, don't even start. You didn't tell me for a damn week after your first encounter. I just wanted to let you finish your workday without freaking out, all right?" She had a point. Turns out, her encounter was a lot like mine, but she was already outside when it started. It had been a gusty day, and the trees were rustling loudly. Sasha said that she and Dash heard the man at the same time. She threw Dash inside, grabbed the .22 rifle, set up in a comfortable shooting position at the outdoor table, and waited for him to reach the fence. As soon as he slowed down, she said, "I shot him right in the forehead." She was proud of herself, and honestly, so was I. Dan and Lucy poured praise on her composure and decision-making, repeating for the 100th time that summer, "Getting behind that fence, that's what's important." They were like strange grandparents, in their own way. The fifth and final encounter occurred on a late August evening. Sasha was inside, and I had just returned from a short hike up the mountain into the national forest. I was nearing the pond with Dash when he froze. I trusted his instincts more than ever, so I looked in the direction he was focused on, but didn't see anything. I started jogging toward the gate around the yard. When I was about 20 yards from the gate, I heard the man screaming. I had to double back to grab Dash's collar to get him to follow me. He was really itching for a fight with the naked bastard. Once we were through the gate, and I made sure it was closed, I turned to see the familiar, chaotic scene unfold. I had gone hiking with my .44 revolver holstered at my side, with a can of bear spray as backup. I wasn't expecting anything, but as I walked toward the south fence, I made sure my revolver was fully loaded, snapping it shut. Dash started barking furiously as we got closer, and Sasha ran out onto the porch, wide-eyed. "Harry, what is it?" she asked. I waved and pointed to the man in the distance. "He showed up right when I got back, but it's all good. We're good." Sasha came down to stand about 20 feet behind me, holding Dash by the collar. We exchanged a nervous grin. She said, "Ever expect to be dispatching naked ghosts before supper, babe?" We both laughed, trying to ease the tension, but no matter how much we joked, the man's screaming and pleading still made my heart race. I hated him, or more accurately, I hated whatever was controlling this pathetic, repetitive spectacle. I wanted to take control, to make it feel real fear. I needed to see what was really behind this, to bully it. He slowed down, reached the fence, and pressed his face between his hands, begging again. I ignored him, walking up close. Sasha shouted from behind me, "Babe, stop! Shoot him!" I smiled, forcing myself to speak. "Hey bud, I know you're in there. I gotta tell you something." I leaned in closer. "This land is mine now. I took it from you." Like the first time I spoke to him in that tone, his reaction was immediate and shocking. His face went completely blank, void of any emotion. He looked to his left, staring out toward the west. I glanced at Sasha. Her jaw dropped, eyes wide, looking at me in disbelief. When I turned back to the man, there was a glimmer of recognition and understanding creeping across his features. He looked back at me with urgent confusion. The bear was barely 15 feet behind him. Then I saw it. A flicker of realization, followed by a flash of anger in his eyes. I pulled the trigger. The bullet went straight into his forehead. He dropped so fast and hard that his knees slammed into his jaw, shattering his 2 front teeth. His body splayed backward, arms flailing above his head, dead instantly. Blood poured from his nose and ears. Sasha let go of Dash, walking slowly to my side. The bear had halted its charge and now stood, gazing down at the dead man. It then raised its head and looked at Dash, who wagged his tail in response. To my surprise, the bear gave a subtle nod. Sasha and I were instantly overwhelmed by the same feeling of relief that we had experienced in the spring when the light in the pond would disappear after we started a fire. It was a deep, physical, and emotional sense of calm. The bear met my eyes for a brief moment. In that gaze, I felt a single, unmistakable message, a warning. The bear turned and picked up the man's arm in its jaws, dragging the body into the setting sun. Sasha and I reached for each other's hands simultaneously, a gust of wind blowing through the leaves of the cottonwood above us. The first yellow leaves of the season were drifting down. The transition from summer to fall was swift. One day it felt like the dry mountain heat of September, and the next, autumn had fully arrived. The aspens turned brilliant yellow, the nights grew crisp, the elk started bugling, the river slowed, the crickets quieted, and the peaks were dusted with snow. As the seasons changed, Sasha and Lucy's friendship continued to grow stronger. I learned that Dan and Lucy had their own encounters with the bear chase over the summer. Dan casually mentioned that he'd designed their homestead layout, so they always had a healthy lead on the naked man. During each of the 4 encounters, Dan had shot the man with his bolt-action rifle, and the closest the man had ever come was 165 yards. And that was only because I was taking a leak when I heard the bastard, Dan had joked. They seemed entirely unfazed by it all. I hoped Sasha and I would eventually reach that level of calm. Lucy's stories were a frequent topic of conversation at dinner. One spring in the early 90s, their daughter had seen the light in one of their ponds. Instead of telling her parents or brothers as they had been taught, she tried to approach it. Dan and Lucy sensed the light's presence before they saw it, and soon the drumming began from the mountains. They found their daughter up to her chest in the water, transfixed by the light, which vanished as soon as Dan waded in to pull her out. They hurried to start a fire, but the drumming only grew louder, closer. For 3 days, they locked themselves in their house, which had become surrounded. When Sasha asked what that meant, Lucy ignored the question and continued with the story. She explained that the Shoshone family who lived north of them, the ones who had sold them the ranch and taught them how to ward off the spirit, had come by to check on Dan, who had missed a meeting to discuss an irrigation plan. They were able to lift the bad medicine that had afflicted the house. When they finally left the house, they discovered that every calf and lamb they'd raised that spring had been skinned, and their skins sewn together with yucca string. These macabre sails were stretched between trees around their house, with cords made from the animal's own sinew. Dan, in a fit of exhausted rage, accused the Shoshone family of doing it, but the patriarch, Old Joe, calmed him and insisted Dan join him for a horseback ride up the mountain. Lucy said that when Dan returned that night, he only spoke of Old Joe and his family as our guardian angels, saying he would do anything for them. Even before hearing that, I was eager to meet this Shoshone family. Last time Dan stopped by, I asked him how they'd feel about me visiting their ranch to introduce myself. He replied, "Oh, they'll come to you when they're ready." I pressed him for more information, but he only said they were normal folk, keeping to themselves and very family-oriented. He mentioned that Old Joe's children now run the large 3,000-acre ranch to the north, while Old Joe himself teaches his grandkids the old ways: how to speak their language, track, ride, and pray. Dan said they still hunt and run their traps in the area and would probably stop by soon. Fair enough, I thought. As he left that day, he added, "Remember, cutting 'em up can release the spirit. You gotta burn the dolls just as you found 'em." After dinner on the evening of September 28th, Sasha and I made a fire and reviewed Dan and Lucy's notes on scarecrow season. To be honest, I'd already read them almost daily. After everything we'd been through that summer, all doubt about this bizarre and terrifying phenomenon had vanished. It was as real to me as anything else in this world. I had a burn pile set up by the back gate, about 20 yards from the porch corner, and had already brought in sand, got a pro-grade roping lasso, and had gas and matches ready by the door. I was prepared. Here are some excerpts from the scarecrow section of Dan and Lucy's notes. This usually only happens 2 to 3 times a season. Overnight, a human-sized burlap and canvas doll will appear near the front door of your home. You don't have to look for them. They'll be obvious. They'll be in a casual, human-like position, sitting on a bench, on the porch steps, or leaning against the porch railing. These dolls weigh between 40 to 50 pounds, are 5 to 6 feet tall, and are dressed in old-fashioned pioneer-style clothes, with a realistic face made from stitches. Important note, they must be burned in the same condition you find them before sunset on the same day. They must be burned more than 20 yards from your house. If they are burned closer than 20 yards, they will come alive, try to run into your home, and attempt to destroy it. They will fight you and hurt you to get inside. The scarecrows aren't very dangerous once they're moved away from your house, but transporting them can be disturbing. Once in motion, they awaken sporadically, move and scream or cry. They wake up for only about 5 seconds at a time, then go limp again. Ignore their pleas. Do not give in to sympathy. If they are not burned by sunset, and you hear drumming, leave immediately. This description scared Sasha more than any of the other spirit manifestations. Lucy had told Sasha she refused to deal with the scarecrows, leaving Dan to handle them. Dan had also mentioned, the evening he first told me about all of this, that the scarecrow was the one he found the most unpleasant. I didn't understand why. It seemed pretty straightforward to me. We'd already been through months of bear chase craziness, either killing a pleading man or watching him get torn apart. Compared to that, this scarecrow stuff seemed easy. Just throw on some headphones, crank up some music, grab the lasso, drag the doll to the burn pile, and light it up. I was ready. I promised Sasha I'd take care of it, and we'd likely find them in the mornings when we were both at home. September turned into October, but still no scarecrows. On the morning of October 3rd, I woke up early to get a run-in down the county road. I tried not to wake Sasha as I changed, put on my shoes, grabbed my bear spray, and put Dash's collar on. As I stepped out the front door, my heart leapt into my throat. I noticed a figure standing further down the porch toward the kitchen. I gasped, startled, and Dash began barking. I quickly stepped back onto the porch, straining to see more clearly. My skin crawled. There, in the silvery light of an autumn morning just before sunrise, stood our first scarecrow. Sasha came running out, wrapped in a blanket, still half asleep, clearly concerned but already knowing what was happening before she even stepped outside. She slowed as she reached the doorframe, looking at me with wide eyes. I just nodded, and she slowly walked out, both of us staring at the scarecrow in silence. It was a large burlap doll, just as Dan and Lucy had described. The scarecrow wore denim overalls over a canvas button-down shirt topped with a straw hat. Its hands and feet were nothing more than lumpy shapes made of burlap. Even from the side, its stitched face was strikingly detailed. It looked like a middle-aged man, wearing a calm smile with blue eyes. It was standing upright, its arms bent, and its burlap thumbs hooked into the straps of its overalls. Dash had calmed down and was now sniffing at the scarecrow's foot, treating it like a new piece of furniture. Sasha took a few steps toward it, eyeing the figure suspiciously. "How is it standing like that? It must have a frame or something to hold it up," she remarked. That was strange. Its lumpy feet barely touched the ground, and I couldn't see any wires or strings holding it up. "I don't know," I said. "Dan and Lucy said they'd be in human-like positions when we find them, but they'll collapse as soon as we move them." I grabbed the broom we'd left on the porch for the fallen leaves and reached it out toward the scarecrow's leg. I glanced at Sasha for approval. She nodded. I poked its knee, and sure enough, it crumpled in on itself like a bag of wet straw. It was shocking how quickly the human-like posture dissipated. It transformed instantly into exactly what Dan and Lucy had described. A misshapen burlap sack filled with wet straw, with the head still intact, now protruding awkwardly from the pile of fabric. Sasha and I exchanged looks of amazement as Dash sniffed at the doll. It was unnerving to look at. We went inside, and I gathered my scarecrow gear. The lasso, matches, and a can of diesel fuel. "Sash, I've got this. Just stay with Dash, turn on some music if it gets noisy, and I'll be done in 10 minutes, I said, offering her a reassuring smile. She looked concerned, but nodded. "All right, but please be careful. That thing is seriously disturbing." I went outside, closed the door behind me, and faced the crumpled scarecrow. It had an eerie presence, but I wasn't as unsettled as I expected. I focused past the doll to the burn pile I had prepared by the back gate. It made sense to tie the lasso to the scarecrow's head from the far side of the porch and drag it down the steps. Lassoing wasn't easy. It took 6 tries to get it around its head. Finally, I pulled the rope tight around its neck. The whole thing felt surreal. How could it have been standing like that? I pushed the thought aside for later and began walking backward, tightening the lasso as I moved. It wasn't very heavy, probably 45 pounds, but it was bulky enough that I had to keep the tension just right. My heart raced. The way Dan and Lucy had described how the scarecrows come to life in quick, terrified bursts filled my mind. I did a lap to shake off the nerves, then took a deep breath and steeled myself for what I had to do. I decided to pull the scarecrow as hard and fast as I could until it was off the porch and clear of the house. I counted down. 3, 2, 1. On go, I yanked the rope with all my strength. The scarecrow's bulk hit the porch steps with a thud. I glanced back and saw it crumpling down into the yard. So far, so good. I kept pulling, now running with the doll, pushing through the grass and toward the gate. I stopped at the gate, opened it, and slowly led the lassoed scarecrow into the meadow, making sure it was at the right spot near the burn pile. I stopped, checked, and saw that it was. I was standing there, looking at the scarecrow. I hadn't noticed any of the spasms or screams I'd been worried about earlier. Maybe it didn't happen every time? I approached cautiously, gently loosening the lasso knot, then slowly lifted the rope from its face over the straw hat. I grabbed the matches and gasoline, poured a bit on the scarecrow's leg, and said, "Adios, pal," before striking the match and dropping it. Just as Dan said, these things were incredibly flammable. Within 5 seconds, the whole thing was in flames, and within 30, it had turned to dust. Well, I thought to myself, that wasn't half bad. I'd take 10 of these over one bear chase any day. I went back inside and found Sasha at the kitchen table, looking up at me with a mix of fear and curiosity. I smiled at her. "It's gone, Sash. It's burned and gone. Nothing to worry about." She fired off a barrage of questions in what felt like seconds. What about the spasms? I didn't hear it scream or cry. What was that like? What did it say? Was it strong when it came to life while you were moving it? I put my hands up. "Whoa, babe. None of that happened. It was just a scarecrow. A doll. It stayed that way the whole time. I dragged it over to the burn pile, lit it up, and it burned like oil-soaked rags. That's literally it. Really, it wasn't bad." She still looked concerned, but with some relief. "None of the things Dan and Lucy warned us about happened?" she asked. "No, none. It was lifeless the whole time. I can't explain how it was standing when we found it, but that, and the fact that it just appeared out of nowhere, was the only strange part." She nodded, still looking concerned, but more at ease now. I showered and got ready for work, kissed Sasha as she was on a conference call, and turned to leave. But she signaled for me to wait, muted her phone, took off her headset, and turned to face me. "Babe, did you feel it when it burned? Did you feel the spirit leave, like when the light goes out in the pond when we start a fire, or when the bear starts dragging the naked man away after he dies?" I hadn't thought about that. "Well, no, I guess I didn't," I admitted. Sasha looked a bit scared. "Harry, shouldn't we feel that?" "I don't know, Sash. I mean, I'll say this. When it was on the porch this morning, I didn't feel the same way I do when the light is in the pond, or when the naked man is charging toward the house. I didn't feel that dread or pressure in the air, you know? And Dash wasn't freaking out like he does when that stuff is going on either. He seems fine now too." She nodded slowly. "That's true. I don't know. I just really like feeling it leave, you know, like a lot." "Me too, babe, but I think this one is different. Dash is our canary in the coal mine, and he's perfectly fine." Dash was standing nearby, happily wagging his tail. I went to work, and when I came home, Sasha seemed more relaxed. She had told Lucy about my experience, and Lucy had said something along the lines of, "Well, some of them are more mellow than others, I guess." Life went on. October was absolutely beautiful, more so than any other stretch of time since we'd bought the place. The leaves were changing, the air was crisp, and I was loving every moment. I even bagged a nice buck during deer season in the national forest above our place. We made steaks, sausage, jerky, and burgers, and with all the jams and chutneys we had canned from our garden, every meal was a feast. We ate like royalty. Then, on the last Saturday in October, I was taking a morning dump when I heard Sasha yelling for me urgently from the kitchen. "Scarecrow number 2, while I'm going number 2? That seemed fitting. I ran into the kitchen, and there was Sasha, standing in her robe, looking out the window. Dash had his paws up on the windowsill. I walked over and looked with her. It was a female doll this time. She looked like a teenage girl, sitting neatly on the stone wall that ran through our yard. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress and a white bonnet. Her face actually looked sweet and peaceful, until I felt the chills run down my spine. Sasha looked up at me and I put my arm around her. "I got this, babe. It's a cakewalk. Just keep Dash inside, turn on some music in case this one's louder than last time, and I'll be back in 10. All right?" Sasha looked concerned, but less so than the first time. She nodded. I grabbed my eclectic scarecrow gear from next to the front door and went outside to assess the situation, figuring out the best way to get the scarecrow to the burn pile. Once again, I was struck by how these flimsy, damp sacks of straw could hold human-like postures before they were moved. Some sort of strange mountain magic, I suppose. My list of unexplainable events had grown significantly, so I just added this to the ever-expanding "it is what it is" category. I opened the gate first this time and walked back to the scarecrow. I felt ready. I nailed the lasso on the second try. As soon as it settled around her waist, I began tightening it, increasing the tension until she toppled over into the grass. Her human-like posture and ladylike dignity immediately vanished, and she became just a lumpy bag of straw. I braced myself for the spasms and jerky movements that Dan and Lucy had described, threw the rope over my shoulder, and began charging across the yard towards the gate and the burn pile. The doll felt lighter than the first one, probably only around 5 feet tall. Within about 10 seconds, I was at the gate, and I couldn't help but look back at the doll. Nothing. No signs of life. Just a scarecrow. I bolted the rest of the way until it was face down in the sand of the burn spot. I gently loosened the lasso, just like before, and thought, really? Not so bad. I poured a little gas on the strange antique dress, dropped a match, and within seconds, the scarecrow was engulfed in flames. In 25 seconds, it was nothing but ash. Sasha was relieved, but seemed concerned by the lack of any frantic movement, which Dan and Lucy had described as the most disturbing part. Well, Sash, it is what it is. They also said they usually only find 2 or 3 of these things a year, so maybe that's it. We could be done with them, I said. Sasha called Lucy to talk about it. Later that afternoon, I was raking leaves when I saw Dan and Lucy's truck pulling up the driveway. They parked, and Dash trotted out to greet them as they came through the gate. Hey there, Harry. They'd come over to hear about the second scarecrow encounter. I walked them through it, then re-walked them through the first encounter, and then did both over again. Dan seemed concerned, which was a bit frustrating for me. I had really embraced the possibility of being off the hook with this one, especially with how disturbing the description of the winter spirit, the ghosts, had been, weighing heavily on my mind. Harry, it's not like I'm some damn expert on all this hoopla, all right? But I've been dragging 2 to 3 of those creepy sacks of shit out to the burn pile every year since before you were even born. I'm telling you, I've never experienced anything like what you're saying. They always wake up a few times when you're moving them, always scream and cry, without fail. It's always an unpleasant experience, and that's putting it mildly. I'm perplexed, and to tell you the truth, I'm a bit perturbed too. Perplexed and perturbed, not the 2 P's, Dan. I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. We'd grown pretty close, and both enjoyed teasing each other. Look, Dan and Luce, I trust you guys beyond measure. I always will. But that's just what happened. Call the Shoshone family if you're worried. Tell them to stop by. I've been wanting to meet them anyway. Maybe they can shed some light on this lack of scarecrow enthusiasm issue. But I just don't see why it's a problem. Shouldn't it be a good thing? All this stuff being a bit easier? Dan and Luce looked at each other. Then Dan stared off into thought for a moment before speaking again. How about this, smartass? He said, grinning. I'll be meeting with Ole, Joe, and one of his sons this coming week about some grazing permit work we're doing together. I'll tell him what's going on here and ask his thoughts. Maybe he can stop by if he can. The latest we've ever found a scarecrow was November 29th, and the earliest we've ever had the winter spirit kickoff was December 13th. So you've got more than a month left for number 3 to turn up. If there is a third one. Also, if you do find a third, do me a favor and just call me. I'll come over. I'd like to see what's going on with these lifeless scarecrows if that's all right. I agreed, and Sasha felt better after hearing that the elders were being consulted, as she often did. And, to be honest, as I usually did too, though at the time, I was too headstrong to reflect on that gratefulness. Dan squinted, taking in the scarecrow standing unnervingly still. He grunted. Yeah, that's definitely number 3, all right. The boy looked even creepier up close, its grin still plastered on its stitched face, eyes wide and almost unnatural. Its strange little body seemed like it had been carefully positioned, like it had been waiting for us. But what sent the chill down my spine was the fact that it wasn't moving. Dan set down the coffee cup he had brought with him. the cheerfulness in his voice fading a bit. "Let's just get this over with. We've done this enough times to know how it goes." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the scarecrow as I approached. The last thing I wanted was for it to twitch or start talking. The unease in my stomach was palpable, but I couldn't afford to be distracted. I pulled out the lasso and looped it over the boy's head. It was easier than I had imagined, probably because it was so light. No resistance, no struggle. It was just a damn doll, after all. I started tugging, pulling the lasso tighter until the scarecrow tumbled to the ground, its lifeless form collapsing into a heap of straw and burlap. But the instant it hit the ground, I felt the temperature drop just a little, the air thickening, as though something was weighing it down. "We need to move quickly," Dan said in a low tone, watching the doll carefully. "These things always have one last surprise. Just don't get too close to it while we're moving it. It's never a peaceful process." We dragged the scarecrow, its limbs flopping and its body crumbling as we moved it toward the burn pile. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that the boy's smile was still lingering in my mind, as if it hadn't left even though the doll was already lifeless. When we finally reached the burn pile, I poured the gas on the scarecrow and, with a shaky hand, lit the match. The fire erupted almost immediately, engulfing the doll in a hot, roaring flame. It burned faster than I expected, quickly turning into a pile of ash. "That's it," I said, exhaling deeply. "It's gone." Dan and I stood there for a moment, watching the fire as it consumed the last remnants of the scarecrow. I could feel the weight lifting from the air, though it still felt off. Something about the way it had appeared, how Sasha had reacted, made me feel like we weren't entirely in the clear. Dan spoke up. "I don't know why this one didn't spasm or scream, but you did the right thing, Harry. You've handled this like a pro. Maybe it's the change in seasons, maybe something's different with this one." He glanced toward the house. "Let's make sure Sasha's all right. You know how she gets after these things." I nodded, already thinking about getting back to her. "Yeah, let's go inside." We walked back to the house, the burn pile behind us smoldering in the early morning light. The moment we stepped onto the porch, Dash was at the door, his tail wagging like nothing had happened. Sasha was still sitting on the couch, wiping her eyes. I went straight to her and sat down beside her, wrapping my arms around her as she rested her head on my shoulder. "You okay, babe?" I whispered. She nodded slowly, but her grip tightened on me, like she wasn't sure if the danger had really passed. I just don't feel right about it, Harry. It was too quiet, too calm. It shouldn't have been that easy." I stroked her hair, trying to reassure her. "I know, Sash, but it's gone now, and if it shows up again, we'll deal with it together." The air felt clearer now, but I knew we weren't done yet. Dan's words echoed in my mind as we sat there, taking a quiet moment to recover. "You've got more than a month left for number 3 to turn up." "Don't worry," I whispered. "We'll handle it." I struggled to maintain my footing as the doll laughed manically, its body shifting unnaturally, twitching and jerking in ways I couldn't understand. The air around us felt thick, the temperature dropping rapidly. The laughter was suffocating, loud, relentless, and insidious. I could feel the sound vibrating through my bones, the heavy pressure of it almost choking me. Dan was standing off to the side now, keeping his distance, but not looking away from the doll. His jaw was set tight, and I could see the worry in his eyes. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't moving forward. The doll's laughter grew louder, more shrill, as if it were mocking us. I gritted my teeth and stepped toward the doll, fighting the impulse to turn and run. I had promised Sasha. I had promised I would handle this. I couldn't let it defeat me. The boy's face was twisted into a sick grin, its eyes piercing through me like twin ice picks. His laughter slowed, but the malice in his eyes didn't fade. It was as if the very air around us was charged, as though this thing could feed off our fear, get stronger with every shudder we tried to suppress. I took a deep breath and lunged forward, grabbing the rope again, this time holding onto it with both hands, yanking with all my strength. The doll's body stiffened, resisting with every ounce of its unnatural strength. I could feel the rope cutting into my palms as I struggled to pull it forward to move it toward the pile. "Dan," I shouted, panic edging into my voice. "Help me, goddammit!" Dan didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, grabbing the rope with me, pulling in unison. The doll jerked violently, trying to escape, but we pulled harder, inching it closer to the pile. For a moment, the laughter stopped. The doll's body went still, almost unnervingly so, and the silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees. I couldn't help but look down at its face, its eyes still locked onto me, its grin unnervingly wide, like it knew something I didn't. "Let's finish this," Dan muttered under his breath. With one final heave, we dragged the doll into the fire. I doused it with gasoline, and without looking back, struck the match. The flames shot up, consuming it almost instantly. The laughter stopped. The air felt lighter, but I could still feel the weight of it lingering, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. We stood there for a moment, watching the doll burn, its twisted form finally melting away into the flames. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the tension leave my body. "That was different," I said, my voice hoarse. Dan didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, his eyes hard. "Yeah," he finally said. "That was something else." We stood there for a few more moments, just watching the flames flicker and burn. The chill in the air still lingered, but it was starting to feel more manageable now. The weight had lifted, but I knew this wasn't over. "Let's go inside," I said, turning toward the house. "Sasha's waiting." Dan nodded and followed me, but we didn't speak much more. The echoes of the doll's laughter still rang in my head, and the image of its glowing eyes was burned into my memory. It wasn't over, but we were one step closer. "Harry," Dan said slowly, his voice low but heavy, "this land is not like the rest. It's not just land. And what you just did, what we just did, it's gonna come with consequences. You know that, right?" I could barely focus on his words. I was still shaking, my breath ragged and my mind a blur of terror and confusion. The words the scarecrow had spoken were still echoing in my head, but I couldn't make sense of them. It was like my body and mind were at odds, nauseous, exhausted, and terrified, yet still desperate to understand what the hell had just happened. What does that mean, Dan? What the hell did I just do?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. Dan's eyes were hard, his usual calm replaced with a kind of grim determination. "You took something that wasn't yours. You took something from this land, something that's been here long before any of us, and now it's coming after you, after both of you." He paused, his gaze flickering to the house, then back to me. "You can't undo it, but we can try to make sure it doesn't get worse. It's not over." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to argue, to tell him that this whole thing was crazy, that it wasn't real, but I couldn't. The image of the scarecrow's twisted face, its words, and the unnatural grip it had on me, the pain in my arm where its hand had grasped me like iron, told me everything I needed to know. This was real. This thing was real, and it wasn't done with me yet. Dan stood up, pulling me to my feet. I swayed for a moment, my legs weak, my head spinning. "We'll get through this," Dan said more to himself than to me. "But you have to understand. The land, it's got a life of its own, and sometimes the things that live on it don't take kindly to trespassers." I nodded weakly, not sure what to say, but knowing that whatever was coming next, I had to face it. I had to face all of it. We walked back toward the house, the wind picking up again, carrying with it the heavy scent of burnt straw and the lingering chill from the scarecrow's scream. As we reached the porch, I glanced back at the burn pile. The fire was still crackling, the ashes swirling in the wind, but the unease in my gut wouldn't settle. "This isn't over, is it?" I asked, my voice tight. Dan didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "No, this is just the beginning." We stood in silence for what felt like hours, the stillness of the meadow pressing down on me. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks cutting into the sky like jagged teeth. The air felt thick, as if the land itself was watching us, waiting for something. I could feel the weight of Joe's words hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Finally, he turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "You think you can control something like this? But you can't. The land is older than you, older than me, older than any of us. It doesn't care about your rules, your promises. It has its own way of keeping balance, and sometimes that balance comes with a price." I swallowed hard, the full weight of his words sinking into my gut. "What price?" I asked, barely able to form the question, but needing to know. Joe's gaze softened just a touch, but it was enough to make me feel like I wasn't entirely lost. Sometimes the land doesn't take a life. It takes a part of you, your mind, your soul, the thing that makes you who you are. The more you try to control it, the more it takes. And if you push too hard, if you get too greedy with what you're trying to understand, it'll break you. I felt my chest tighten as he spoke. It was as if the weight of everything, the scarecrows, the light, the fear, the terror, was crashing down on me all at once. I wanted to argue, to say that I could handle it, that I could protect my family, but the raw truth in Joe's words made my knees feel weak. Dan and Lucy, they know, Joe continued. They've seen things. They've learned to live with it. And you have to do the same. Learn to live with it. You can't fight it, not fully, but you can respect it. You can honor the land, the spirit, and the rules we've passed down. I nodded slowly, the weight of the promise I made to him, to myself, settling deep within me. There was no more fighting. There was only survival. Joe clapped me on the back with a force that nearly knocked me over. Come on, let's go make sure your wife isn't falling apart in there. And remember, no more games with the spirit. You're not the first to try, and you won't be the last. But you have a chance to do it right. Don't waste it. We walked back to the house in silence, the early morning sun finally beginning to rise over the horizon. It felt like a new chapter was beginning, one that I wasn't sure I was ready for, but knew I had to face. I had no choice. I had to respect the land, the spirit, and the wisdom of those who had lived with it before me. When we reached the porch, I turned to Joe one last time. Thank you, I said, my voice quiet but sincere, for everything. Joe gave me a single nod, his expression unwritable. You'll find your way, just don't forget the price of knowledge. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist of the morning, leaving me standing there, facing the future. Sitting on the porch, watching the snow fall softly across the land, I felt a strange kind of peace begin to settle in. It wasn't the peace of naive ignorance, but a tentative acceptance, a kind of surrender, where I could admit that I didn't have control over everything, especially not the spirit or the land, but I could still fight, still protect, still stand beside Sasha and Dash. I could still learn to live with it all. I had to. I spent those days off trying to reconcile the man I'd been with, the man I needed to become. The soldier who charged in headfirst, seeking battle, was at odds with the husband who needed to learn patience and trust. There was a deeper battle to fight, one inside me, between my instincts and the understanding I needed to survive here. I'd always been a warrior at heart, but that didn't mean I was always the right man for the job. Sometimes, I had to fight in ways I wasn't used to. By listening, by waiting, by trusting the wisdom of the land and those who understood it better than I ever could. Sasha was the anchor. She always had been, even when I couldn't see it clearly. She was the steady hand that knew when to stand firm and when to bend, the one who could face the unknown with a quiet strength I could never quite match. And Dash, well, the dog was smarter than both of us, it seemed. There was a kind of purity in his presence, a knowing that went beyond instinct, a connection to the land that grounded all of us. The days following were spent in quiet work, chores, long talks, and moments of silence that spoke volumes. We spoke of the future, of the possibility of more spirits, of more trials, and of the ways we'd face them. But we also spoke of the beauty here, the land that had captivated us both. There was a peace to be found in this place, and we had a choice to make, whether we would let fear dictate our lives, or whether we would claim it as our own. That week of reflection passed, and as I stood up, brushing off the snow from my boots, I realized something. I wasn't alone in this anymore. We were a team, me and Sasha, with Dash at our heels. The spirit, whatever its intentions, would have to contend with us together. We would face whatever came with open eyes and hearts fortified with the lessons we had learned. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in its quiet, soft embrace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. On my 18th birthday, feeling completely lost and without direction, I made a decision that changed everything. I dropped out of high school and hopped on a bus downtown where I signed up with an organization known for reshaping young men into disciplined soldiers. For the next 6 years, that became my life. Most of it was spent in training, living in fluorescent-lit rooms, dealing with exhaustion, and constantly pushing myself beyond my limits. The other part? Afghanistan. Though my choices were made for me, Afghanistan was the first place I ever felt truly free. It's where I discovered my purpose, where I first felt truly valued by others, and it's where I learned to become a source of comfort for my comrades. And as intense as it was, the experience of combat, of facing another man in battle, intrigued me. Combat is a fundamental part of human existence, as old as the earliest forms of society. I'm not talking about the political side of war or grand strategy. I'm talking about the pure, brutal act of fighting. It's simple in its essence: survival, strength, and the clarity of knowing that you are there to destroy your opponent before they do the same to you. In a strange way, there's something almost intoxicating about that clarity, that primal connection to something deeply human. But most of my time there was frustrating. I was part of a Marine infantry battalion, filled with fast, strong, competitive 18 to 22-year-olds who were trained to do one thing: fight, and fight hard. But as I quickly realized, not everything requires that level of intensity. After boot camp and infantry training, I became a rifleman, a grunt. My job was to storm beaches, siege fortifications, and lead invasions. But sending soldiers like me to police civilian areas, looking for insurgents who blended in with regular people, felt like a waste of that training. Checkpoints, car searches, and dealing with snipers, it was exhausting and often pointless. After over a year of that, my battalion joined a multinational coalition for the invasion of Marja. That was the moment that truly tested us. We went from policing streets to fighting seasoned Taliban warriors. These were men who had fought the Soviets, and now they were fighting us. They believed in their cause, and they weren't going down easily. We were up against people who, if we killed them, couldn't hurt others in the same way. No more oppression, no more violence against women and children, no more senseless killing. But when the operation was over, it felt like I was back to fighting against people like me, angry, young men. It became clear to me that I was done. The excitement, the purpose, it was gone. I didn't want to continue being part of a system that didn't seem to have any real meaning. I took the opportunity to leave, but with that came the challenge of reintegrating into normal life back in America. To my surprise, I managed it. Much of that was thanks to Sasha and the friends I met along the way, who showed me that there was a way to live without being constantly surrounded by chaos and fear. Since then, I've become gentler and more caring, and I've really come to value experiences and relationships outside of my time in the Marine Corps. I no longer believe my purpose on Earth is solely to fight. But here's the thing: I'm wired to face physical threats head-on. I'm the type who spits in its face, goes for the headbutt, and doesn't stop until I've neutralized the threat. That brings me to something much more bizarre, horrifying, and out of my control. The strange and terrifying manifestations of an ancient earth spirit that seems to have taken a personal dislike to me. The thought of facing this spirit again, especially with the winter approaching, had me absolutely terrified. The people and forces I was trained to confront with violence were now returning to make their presence known. But I promised Sasha I'd try to handle it, and to be honest with her if I ever felt I couldn't cope. So we moved forward. We settled back into a routine in November. I spent a lot of time hunting grouse and pheasant with Dash. Sasha and I cooked together every night. Once we were in the clear from the third scarecrow encounter, we invited Sasha's family over for Thanksgiving. It was a blast. Her parents, brother, sisters, and a few nieces came to stay with us. It was nice to have everyone around, hiking, cooking, and just enjoying the time together. It reminded me that if we could figure out the timing of all these weird events, life could still be somewhat normal. With the ghost season looming, I spent as much time as I could with Dan, preparing for what was ahead. I needed to approach it calmly, especially after how I'd escalated things over the summer. Dan and Joe had told me that the ghosts usually made their appearance around December 13th. Between Thanksgiving and then, I made it my goal to try and stay calm and grounded. One evening, after Sasha's family had left, I went over to Dan's for some beers and a chat, and we sat in his barn, watching over his pastures. "It's hard, Harry," Dan said. I ain't gonna lie, it's tough on Luce too. Sasha won't be able to see them, but she'll know they're there. That's enough to mess with anyone's head, you know? Though I will say. He took a long swig of beer and stared ahead, lost in thought. I'll say, Sasha and Luce are lucky they can't see or hear them. Why's that? I asked, already guessing the answer. Well, the ghosts. They'll try to scare you, mess with you every chance they get. At least the ones I've had. They'll wait outside the door, jump at you when you go outside. They'll pop up at your window when they sense you're looking out. They'll start screaming when you're asleep, pounding on the walls, running on the roof. It wears you down. I felt my stomach turn. Hearing this made my anxiety spike, but I had to know more. Can I touch them? Can they touch me? Can they do anything to my stuff? Deflate my tires or something? Dan gave a small smile but looked grim as he responded. If they're outside your house, they can't touch you, and you can't touch them. Sometimes, if one's really worked up, it might knock something over like a chair, but that's not common. You can hear them banging on the walls, running on your roof, hitting the glass. No damage, but it sure messes with your head. If one's really angry, sometimes they'll scream right in Lucy's ear and she can hear it. Dan looked away, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere. There's one in particular who likes to torment Luce every year. I call him the Whelp. Follows her everywhere when she's outside. He's one of the worst. It's real scary for Luce. Makes me want to do something about it, but nothing works. I've tried everything, raged at him, taunted him, even tried to befriend him. Nothing changes. Since then, I've become more compassionate and understanding, learning to appreciate the value of experiences and relationships outside of my military life. Fighting isn't my purpose anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to handle physical threats. My instincts still kick in when things get tense. I act fast, decisively. However, when it comes to dealing with the strange, terrifying, and violent manifestations of an ancient spirit that's developed a personal vendetta against me, it feels completely against my nature. The winter ahead looked like a nightmare. The people I was trained to confront with force were returning to my life, and I was terrified. But I promised Sasha I'd try my best, and if I ever felt I couldn't handle it, I'd let her know. So I pushed forward. November passed in a familiar rhythm. I spent time hunting with Dash and cooking meals with Sasha. Once we knew we were safe from the third scarecrow, we invited Sasha's family over for Thanksgiving. Her parents, siblings, and one of her sister's children stayed with us, while the rest found accommodations at Dan and Lucy's. It turned into a great time, hiking, cooking, and enjoying each other's company. It reminded me that, with some balance, we could still lead a normal life, even in the midst of all the strangeness. With the ghost season approaching, I spent as much time as I could with Dan, preparing myself. I needed to be calm, especially after how I'd reacted in the summer. Dan and Joe said the earliest the ghosts had arrived was December 13th, so I focused on staying as centered as possible in the weeks leading up to it. One evening, after Sasha's family left, I went to Dan's for some beers and a chat, and we sat together in his barn, looking out at his pastures. It's hard, Harry. I won't sugarcoat it. It's hard on Lucy too. Sasha won't see them, but she'll feel them. That's enough to mess with your head, you know? Dan paused, taking a swig from his beer. But I'll tell you this, he continued. Luce and Sasha are lucky they can't see or hear them. I nodded, already starting to understand where this was going. Why's that? I asked. Well, these ghosts, if they want to mess with you, they'll do everything they can to unsettle you. They'll wait outside, jump at you when you walk out, pop into a window screaming when they feel you looking outside. They'll scream outside your bedroom at night, run around on the roof. It gets to you, Harry. A cold chill ran down my spine just hearing about it. I had to know more. Can I touch them? Can they touch me? What about Sasha, Dash, or my stuff? Can they mess with anything like that? Dan gave me a grim look. If they're outside, they can't touch you. You can't touch them. But sometimes if they're really worked up, they might knock something over, like a chair or something. It's not common though. They make noise, pounding on walls, running on the roof. You can hear them, but they don't cause any real damage. Sometimes Lucy can hear them too. Dan looked distant for a moment, his mind clearly elsewhere. The same one likes to pick on Lucy year after year. I call him the Whelp. He follows her everywhere she goes outside. He's one of the worst. Makes me want to strangle him all over again. We were on patrol when we got ambushed. At first, it sounded like there were 50 attackers, but it turned out to be just 4 guys. Our NCO and my platoon got hit, and we all hit the ground. I crawled along a ditch next to some poppy fields and saw a guy running toward me, real low, with an AK. It scared me, but I managed to get the drop on him, and that was that. In reality, I was terrified. I emptied my whole magazine in his direction, barely aiming because I was shaking so much. I probably hit him in the foot, the neck, and a few other spots. "I'll call him Buck," I said, looking back at Dan. Dan nodded, then asked, "So what about the others?" I scratched my chin. A couple of days later, during the heavy fighting in Marja, a car full of fighters tried to break through our sector. They ran right into our whole company. I wasn't in a good position when we first made contact, but once I moved into a better spot, I shot into the guys in the back seat. By the time I started firing, I'm pretty sure they were already dead. At least 10 or 12 of us were shooting at that car, so the chances of anyone surviving were slim, but I can't be sure. We sat quietly for a moment, drinking our beers, the cold biting at my hands. I knew I needed to head back for dinner soon, but I had a couple more questions. "Dan, can we see each other's ghosts?" Dan glanced at me before responding. "No, at least I can't see Joe's or his son's, and he can't see mine. But we can feel each other's presence," he said, looking away. "I'll let Joe tell you about his, if he decides to." I nodded. Sasha had been thinking a lot about Dan's account of the one man he killed, who was respectful during the ghost season. She thought maybe if we could learn more about who these spirits were before they died, we might be able to make peace with them, perhaps keep them occupied or surrounded by things they liked. "One more question," I said. "You said they keep some of their earthly personalities. What does that mean? Are they angry they're here? Where are they coming from? Do they even remember who they were?" Dan held up a hand, stopping my barrage of questions. Easy now," he said with a chuckle. "Those are all different answers." He took a long pull from his beer and continued. "First off, I don't know where they come from or what happens after they die. Joe and I think they don't remember where they were before they came here. They don't know why they're here, but they know one thing. You're the reason they're dead, and now they see you live your life. And that makes them angry." "Do they remember who they were?" I asked. Dan nodded slowly. "They remember parts of who they were. I've tried communicating with them, tried to use a translator to write things down in both English and Vietnamese a while back. But it didn't work. It's like they can't hear you, can't read anything, but you can show them things. One of the guys I killed must have been a birder, because he started paying attention to the eagles I pointed out to him. Since then, he's been a little more peaceful. Another guy must have been a gardener, because when he's not bothering me, he likes to follow Lucy around the greenhouse, watching her work. It's strange." I paused for a moment, reflecting on what Dan said. "And then there's Wolf," he added, a slight smile on his face. "The one I'm closest to. He must have been a good man before I ended his life. He keeps his distance, smiles when he sees me, walks around the land, but doesn't bother me or Lucy." I couldn't imagine what it would be like to connect with someone I had killed, or how to even understand them. It struck me that the fighters I'd encountered in Afghanistan were probably so different from me. From everything I knew, many of them had never even seen a world map, let alone heard of a place like Idaho. We might as well have been from different planets. I had a few more conversations like that with Dan as Thanksgiving turned into December. He kept ending each chat with, "Just don't let those candles go out before sunrise. If you do, fight. You can't get away in time." I could tell he was getting more apprehensive too, and that shook me. 40 years of experience and he was rattled? That made me nervous as hell. Lucy had shared some tips with Sasha as well. I can't imagine how tough it is for Sash and Luce. At least I can see these things. For them, it's like living in a haunted house. But Lucy seemed to manage it well, saying that while the spirits are around, she mostly focuses on keeping Dan calm. She did mention that a few times each season, the spirits really get to her, screaming in her ear or knocking things over when she's outside alone. But she said you kind of get used to it. Lucy also said that no matter how many winters pass, she still finds Dan up in the middle of the night, sitting in the kitchen with his rifle, watching the candles, making sure they stay lit. Sasha seemed almost excited as December 13th approached. I, on the other hand, was a nervous wreck. Trying to hide that from Sasha only made it worse. She found some massive 24-hour burning candles online, and we ordered every single one. We figured if we lit 6 or 7 on the kitchen island every night, out of the reach of any breeze, we'd have 4 going all night, and I could actually get some sleep. But I knew damn well that I wouldn't be sleeping much while they were here. Hell, my anxiety was so bad after Thanksgiving that I'd barely slept at all. December 13th came, and I woke up emotionally drained, praying they would just show up. The waiting was killing me, but they didn't come. Not that day, not the next. Since the 13th, I spent every daylight hour on the property with binoculars, scanning the tree lines. On the morning of December 21st, I did my usual routine. I sat up, turned around, and looked out the window at the pastures. Nothing. It was snowing pretty hard. My panic from waking up subsided until I realized Sasha wasn't in bed, which cranked it right back up. I never sleep through her getting out of bed, especially over the last week when I was jumpy as hell. Even the dog farting or the furnace kicking on had me on edge. "Sash?" I called out, checking if she was in the bathroom. I jumped up and almost ran to the living room. "Sash?" "I'm in the kitchen, babe," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That calmed me down immediately. I walked in and saw her sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and a book. Dash trotted over to greet me. "Sorry, didn't notice you got up." I shook my head and leaned down to kiss her. But as I stood back up, she smiled, though something about it was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew her too well. "What?" I asked her. The moment I spoke, I saw her smile falter. "Babe, what is it?" I asked again, this time more serious. She closed her book, took a deep breath. My heart skipped. Was she about to tell me she was pregnant? She stood up, took my hands, and looked me in the eyes. The strength in her gaze was almost overwhelming. I was floored. And then she spoke. "Sherry, it woke me up an hour ago at sunrise, but I wanted you to sleep. I can feel it. It might be the ghosts or it might not, but I know the spirit is here. I know it." Her calm demeanor stayed firm as my stomach dropped and a rush of adrenaline surged through me. I wasn't sure what to say, but at that moment, I felt unprepared for this. I thought I had already experienced all the dread this spirit could cause, but I was wrong. Since then, I've softened and learned to appreciate the deeper value of experiences and relationships beyond my time in the Marine Corps. I no longer feel my life's purpose revolves around constant fighting. That said, I'm not built to analyze a physical threat. I'm built to confront it head-on, to act with instinct, to fight back fiercely. But when it comes to dealing with the bizarre, terrifying, and violent manifestations of some ancient earth spirit that seems to have taken a particular interest in making my life miserable, everything I'm wired for tells me to fight. The thought of this winter terrified me. The same people I had been trained to face with violence, people I'd faced and fought, were coming back to haunt me. I was scared, but I promised Sasha I'd try. I told her that if I couldn't handle it, I'd leave. So we continued on. As November ended, we found our rhythm again. I spent time hunting with Dash, and Sasha and I cooked together every night. After the scarecrow ordeal, we invited Sasha's family for Thanksgiving, so they could finally see the place. Her parents, siblings, and one of her sister's kids came out. A couple stayed with us, and others stayed with Dan and Lucy. It was a great time, hiking, cooking, and drinking together. We realized that if we could manage the timing of the spirit's visits, we could live a relatively normal life. With the ghost season approaching, I spent as much time as I could with Dan to prepare myself. I knew I had to handle this differently than I had in the past. Dan and Joe mentioned the earliest the ghosts usually appeared was December 13th, so my goal between Thanksgiving and then was to calm myself as much as possible. After Sasha's family left, I went over to Dan's for some beers and conversation. We sat in his barn, looking out at the pastures. Dan spoke candidly. "It's tough, Harry. It's tough on Luce, too. Sasha won't see them, but she'll feel them. It messes with your head, you know. But, I will say, Luce and Sasha are lucky they can't see or hear them." Why? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Well, the ghosts try to unsettle you. They'll wait outside and jump at you when you go out. They'll scream at your windows when they know you're looking. They pound on your roof at night. They knock things over. It wears on you. My stomach twisted at the thought, but I needed to learn everything I could. Can they touch us? Can they mess with our stuff? Dan gave me a grim look. If they're outside, they can't touch you, and you can't touch them. Sometimes, if one gets really worked up, it can knock something over, but that's rare. You can hear them, pounding on the walls, running on the roof, banging on the windows. They won't break anything, but you'll hear it, and sometimes Lucy does too. He looked off into the distance, continuing, There's one that likes to follow Lucy. I call him the whelp. He's one of the worst. He scares the hell out of her. I've tried everything, raising hell, even trying to befriend him, but nothing works. As I took my next breath, a rush of emotions flooded me, anger, grief, confusion, like a toxic cloud of energy swirling in my chest. It twisted and pulsed, burning with intensity as it surged through my body. I coughed, a sharp gag escaping my throat. I knew then that wasn't just them, the ghosts, but the spirit itself, the dark force. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it in my bones. I took a slow, deep breath to regain my composure. There's nothing inside you. Relax. This is all part of the game. Dash pawed at my leg and I patted his head, whispering, It's okay, buddy. It's okay. I remembered Joe's advice, stick to the methods and Sasha would be safe. I took another breath, steadied myself, and turned to face the ghosts, who hadn't moved. Their gazes were locked on me. As we stared at each other across the field, a strange, nostalgic feeling crept over me. A childhood memory of walking past the junkyard near my house, where an angry dog would always bark at me through the chain-link fence. The dog would snarl and froth, knowing that the fence kept it from tearing into me. I felt the same tight knot of tension in my muscles as if I was ready to run. I was angry, at first at the men before me, but then that anger shifted. It wasn't just directed at them anymore. It was like the spirit was pulling my rage toward it, feeding off of it. It wanted me to give in to my fury, to give it a reason to attack. But I wasn't going to let it. I couldn't. I felt guilt then, not for killing them, but for the way they died. They fought on their home soil, or near it, and they died at the hands of strangers from across the world. I'd always rationalized it before, but in that moment, I realized the truth. There was no justification for their hatred of me, and I couldn't blame them for it. I turned and walked back to the house, shutting the gate behind me. Dash looked over his shoulder, then back at me with urgency in his eyes. I know, buddy. Let's go inside. I sat with Sasha and told her what I'd seen, who the fifth man was. We had taken the entire week off for the holidays, and now, the reality of facing 12 uninterrupted days of this was overwhelming. It felt like being trapped in a nightmare. Despite it all, Sasha tried to keep the holiday spirit alive. We weren't religious, but Sasha loved decorating the house for Christmas. We hung lights, drank hot toddies, and played festive music. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ghosts were closing in, so I kept peeking out the window, watching the pasture for any signs of movement. Sasha suggested we go cut down a Christmas tree, a small spruce near the bottom of the driveway. She could sense I was struggling, but was trying to be strong for me, and I appreciated that more than anything. Sherry, we can't let them control us. If we stick to the methods, we'll be safe. I think we should show that we're not afraid. I'm not trying to pressure you, but that's how I feel we should handle this. I wanted to stay inside, drink whiskey, and ignore the whole damn thing, but I knew she needed me to stand with her. Let's do it. We grabbed the handsaw and walked out into the snow, Dash bounding ahead of us, his red gold coat a bright streak against the white backdrop of the world. As I took my next breath, the tension in the air seemed to solidify. The emotion, fear, grief, confusion, felt like it was rushing into my chest. It was as if it physically affected me, twisting into something I couldn't control. My body reacted with a cough, my lungs struggling to take in the weight of it all. That was the spirit, not the ghosts. Somehow I knew that. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. There's nothing in you, just a trick of the spirit, I told myself. Relax. Dash nudged my leg, as if sensing my distress. I patted his head. It's all right, buddy. I thought of Joe's advice. stick to the methods, and Sasha would be safe. I refocused, looking back at the figures in the distance. The ghosts hadn't moved, but there were 5 of them now, still watching me. They stood there, unmoving, like they were waiting for something. The sensation in my body reminded me of a strange, unsettling moment from my childhood. When I'd walk past the junkyard, knowing the ferocious dog behind the fence would lunge at me, its rage a physical force I could feel, knowing it was contained only by the metal barrier. My muscles tensed in the same way now, the urge to run or fight surging through me. At first, I felt anger. But as the tension mounted, I realized the spirit was trying to provoke me. It wanted me to give in to that anger. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Staring back at the ghosts, standing there on my land, I felt something else too, guilt. Not for killing them, but for the fact that they died defending their own land. It hit me hard. These men didn't choose to be where they were, and I couldn't ignore their right to hate me. I turned away and started walking back to the house. As I reached the gate, Dash's attention shifted, his ears perked up, and he looked back, urgency in his eyes. "I know, buddy. Let's go inside." Inside, I told Sasha what I'd seen. We'd been planning to relax during the holidays, but I felt trapped, unable to escape the weight of it all. Sasha, as usual, did her best to stay positive. We weren't religious, but she loved decorating for Christmas. We hung lights, played festive music, and tried to make the house feel warm. But my eyes kept darting to the window, checking if the ghosts had started moving closer. She suggested we go out and pick a Christmas tree, trying to bring some normalcy to the situation. I knew she was trying to stay strong for both of us. "Harry, we can't let them control us. If we stick to the methods, we'll be safe," she said. "I want to go on with life. Let's show them we're not afraid, but I won't push you." I wanted to stay inside, away from all of it, but I knew how much it meant to her. "Let's do it." We grabbed the saw and walked out into the snow. Dash bounded ahead, his red golden coat standing out brightly in the white. I stomped over to the saw, and as if sensing our plan to finish what we'd started, Dash calmed, looked at me, wagged his tail, then bounded up to Sasha and planted himself, head low, between her and the ghost. I picked up the saw and looked at the young man. His smile was fading, being replaced by anger, which made me smile. "More of a cat guy, huh?" I asked him as I bent down and sawed the last inch or so of the tree. I gripped the sappy, cold trunk, hoisted the little tree over my shoulder, and turned to the young man. His face, all condescension gone, was twisted into a rictus of hate. Looking at these ghosts wasn't quite the same as looking at a living person, but the difference was small. They weren't translucent. I could see pores and scars in his skin, but it's still kinda like looking at something when you're having a migraine. Their legs, arms, torso, and head are all there, but you can only clearly see whatever you're looking at directly. Their periphery is just elusive, hard to describe. We stared at each other for a few long moments. He looked to be about my age when we last met. I remembered him then, seeing a guy in my rifle company drag his body by the ankle to a row of the other fighters he'd been killed with. The friction of the road, pulling his shirt up over his head, exposing the bullet holes and coagulated blood covering his stomach and sternum. Then the image of him screaming into Sasha's face flooded in. I pointed at him with my saw and nodded. "Slick move, hombre, for real. Top-notch spook maneuver. I'll call you creeps." Disgust joined the hate in his glower. As I turned back toward Sasha, my heart skipped a beat again as adrenaline shot into my face. The other 4 ghosts were all clustered now, only 20 yards away in the meadow, with Bridger in the front. He looked at me with fiery judgment. My ears popped and my hands started shaking. As we locked eyes, my mind dredged up long-forgotten details, apprehensively searching his body for a suicide vest, smelling smoky pine in his clothes, leaning across him to unbuckle his seatbelt, the soft tinking of the dying engine, unceremoniously pulling him out of that smoking, blood-riddled truck down onto the road, seeing shattered glass under him and almost reflexively reaching down to move his head so he wouldn't cut himself. The brief lance of shock at my even having that trace of humanity left in me, which I remembered almost feeling proud of myself for. "Harry, what is it?" I snapped out of my strange recall and looked at Sasha, who looked concerned. I shook my head. "Nothing, darlin'." I turned back to Bridger, closed my eyes, and bowed my head toward him. When I looked back up, his expression hadn't changed. That was a very long night, but far easier than those that followed. That evening, after our first tango with the ghosts, Sash and I decorated our little Christmas tree and made some tacos. We tried to stay upbeat, but that experience really shook us both. As sunset approached, all I wanted to do was start slamming Kentucky Hooch to take the edge off, but I'd already accepted needing to monitor the candles all night. Sash said not to think like that. She'd set up a candle station on the kitchen island and ordered a glass orb with open ends to shield the candles. We'd practiced 7 times over the last weeks with the slow-burning candles we'd ordered, and they all burned for 25 to 30 hours without fail. Still? Yeah, fucking right, I was gonna sleep. Quite impish of the spirit to make its seasonal debut on the solstice too, the longest night of the year. We lit the candles and stepped out onto the back porch, looking out into the pasture at the ghosts. Sasha watched me closely as my gaze followed theirs. There was a group of 3 near the pond, and Bridger with another near the woods on their own. But all of them were looking up at the mountains to the east, toward the source of the drumming, I thought. It gave me the chills. After sunset, they all went back to their quiet wandering. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours after Sasha fell asleep. I must have checked the candles a dozen times before finally passing out around 3 a.m. Woke up around 7 a.m., panicked, and rushed to the kitchen to check the candles. Still lit, and plenty of time to burn. I realized then that this would be a long few weeks. I went back into the room. Dash was standing on the bed looking at me like I was crazy, and Sasha sat up, rubbing her eyes. She gave me a tired grin. I told you they'd keep burning, babe. I nodded and then got dressed, determined to check on the ghosts. It was cold that morning, the kind of cold that froze everything in its path. I walked behind the house and looked out into the pasture. Again, the ghosts were scattered around the property, all staring up at the gray sky and the clouds above the mountains. I wondered if they felt the spirit up there or if they even understood it. I focused my binoculars on the closest one, Hank. He looked upset, almost concerned or frustrated as he stared at the mountain. I scanned another one, Buck. He was doing the same, almost a look of consternation. It sent a shiver down my spine. Was the spirit talking to them, whispering down schemes and proposals? When the sun finally rose, they broke from their eerie routine and turned to stare right at me, their anger replacing whatever focus they had before. I felt it, just a flicker, but a sharp pulse of dread. All right, I thought, spirits definitely talking to them about me. Over the next few days, the ghosts spent their time in the pastures watching me, but slowly creeping closer each evening. I actually managed to get 5 hours of sleep the second and third nights, waiting for their wailing, shrieking, or other disturbing noises to begin. The 4th night was Christmas Eve. We lit the candles and shared a glass of wine on the back porch. Everywhere we went, Sasha watched my face, followed my eyes. I could tell she felt guilty when I'd catch her looking, but she'd quickly look away. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I want to know where they are, she admitted. I put my arm around her. It's okay, Sash, I don't mind. I explained what they were doing as they walked along the fence around the yard, all of them alone, hands behind their backs or in their pockets, watching us dash the forest. Like prison guards, I thought. Right around sunset, they stopped, staring east at the mountains. I had told Sasha about this, but when she saw it live for the first time, it was the first time she looked genuinely disturbed. Are they? I finished her thought for her. Communicating with the spirit, getting instructions. She looked at me with wide eyes. I kissed her head. I didn't mean to scare you, babe. She looked out, trying to see what I saw. Maybe the spirit is telling them that it's time to try to get in if the candles aren't lit, and at sunrise, their window is closed. Now, I felt disturbed. Sasha was reading in bed, so I decided to check on them again. I grabbed the spotlight and cracked the door. I couldn't see anything, but I heard whispering to the right, down the porch toward the kitchen. I stepped out and leaned around and froze as terror surged through me. The second I leaned far enough to see down the porch, I saw Creeps and Pete. They were standing side by side at the end of the porch, their heads lowered, glaring at me from under their brows. The sight made my legs lock up with the urge to slam the door. They were there for a moment before sprinting out of sight, down the porch on the other side of the house. When I heard their steps go silent, I realized just how fast my heart was pounding. So it begins, I thought. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spot they'd vanished from. Sure, one of them would jump out at any second. Dash stood next to my left leg, growling. Without looking away, I muttered, "I know, buddy, they're assholes." I leaned back into the doorframe. When my gaze reached the steps heading down from the front door, my body reacted faster than my mind did. A loud noise blasted into my ear, making me wince and throw my arms up to protect my face as I stumbled back from the man who had suddenly appeared immediately to the left of the front door, only 2 feet away. He had yelled right into my ear. "Duh!" Dash shot out the door, planting himself on top of the steps, barking fiercely into the night. I brought my hands down and looked up at Buck. He was standing there, shaking his hands at his sides, bouncing on the balls of his feet, breathing heavily, glaring at me with intense fury like a boxer preparing for the first round. Sasha was in the living room, yelling at me to tell her what was going on. I took a deep breath. "It's fine, love." I stepped around Buck and leaned down to grab Dash's collar, pulling him back into the house. Dash was furious. As I pulled him past Buck, he snapped toward the ghost so fast and hard I heard the sound of his jaws echoing through the night. Buck flinched away from the bite, raising his hands as if to shield himself. His reaction was so unexpected that I froze. Dash didn't even know where Buck was. He was barking and looking around everywhere. It was just a lucky snap in the right direction. They really are terrified of dogs. "Please take Dash, babe," Sasha said, helping me pull him in. I leaned against the doorframe and looked back at Buck. He was seething, but I swear there was a hint of embarrassment in his glare. My heart was racing, but I calmed myself. It was -5 outside, and Sasha was yelling at me to come inside and shut the door. I held his gaze and nodded at him. "This here's the dog's porch, his rules, pal?" He almost seemed to be straining to hold back his anger. It wasn't that he wasn't furious, he just looked miserable, like a guy who's angry at everything, not just one person. I put my hand over my heart and bowed my head. "Koda Hafiz, my man, don't scare Santa." I watched him closely to see if he'd understand the Dari farewell. But nope. I shut the door and leaned back against it. Sasha looked at me, exasperated. I told her what happened and we went to bed. I could hear them running down the porch a few times that night, but we managed to get some sleep. Christmas morning, we woke up feeling surprisingly rested. We cranked up some music, made coffee, exchanged small gifts, cooked a big breakfast, and spent the day watching movies. That afternoon, Sasha told me she wanted to leave the ghosts a gift. It made me uneasy. "I don't know, babe," she was insistent. "Why not? Why not at least try to make a gesture of goodwill? It's Christmas, Harry. They might not know that, but we do. Let's just see how it goes." I reluctantly agreed and saw that she'd already put together quite a thoughtful plan. She pulled out a serving dish from the fridge, neatly arranging a small lamb kebab, some naan, 5 of her grandma's fancy little ramekins filled with palaw, a rice dish I instantly recognized, and some dates. I looked at her, stunned. "Sash, when? How did you?" She cut me off. "I thought you might shut the idea down, so I looked up some Afghan food and made some." She shrugged with a smirk. "Tell me where they are, and I'll set it down in front of them. Maybe it'll remind them of home." We put on our coats and started to head outside when Sasha stopped and turned back. She brought Dash inside and talked to him. "Sorry, buddy. They don't think you're as handsome as everyone else does." I waited on the porch while she came back out wearing one of her big scarves. She threw it over her head, wrapping one end around her shoulder with a practiced motion. A headscarf. "Sash, did you practice putting on a hijab for this little Christmas gesture?" I teased. She gave me a condescending smile and retorted, "It's not a hijab, it's more like a shayla, a headscarf." I chuckled, impressed, though it also made me nervous. I leaned back into the doorframe. When my gaze reached the steps heading down from the front door, my body reacted faster than my mind. A loud noise suddenly blasted into my ear, making me flinch and throw my arms up to shield my face as I staggered back from the man who had unexpectedly appeared to the left of the door, only 2 feet away. He had screamed right into my ear. Dash immediately shot out the door, planting himself on the steps, barking furiously into the night. I brought my hands down and looked at Buck. He stood there, shaking his hands at his sides, hopping on his feet, breathing heavily, glaring at me with intense anger, like he was ready to go a few rounds in the ring. Sasha was inside, calling out to me, asking what was going on. I took a deep breath. "It's fine, love." I stepped around Buck and grabbed Dash's collar, pulling him back into the house. Dash was upset. As I pulled him past Buck, he snapped toward the ghost, jaws snapping so loudly that it echoed. Buck flinched away, putting his hands up as if trying to block the dog. His reaction was so unexpected, I froze. Dash didn't even know where Buck was. He was barking and looking all around. It was just a lucky snap in the right direction. They really are terrified of dogs. "Please take Dash, babe," Sasha said, helping me pull him inside. I leaned against the doorframe and glanced back at Buck. He looked furious, but there was something else in his expression, almost embarrassment, like he couldn't quite keep up the anger. My heart was racing, but I calmed myself. It was freezing outside, and Sasha was calling for me to come inside and shut the door. I held his gaze and nodded. "This here's the dog's porch. His rules, pal." He seemed to strain to keep his anger in check, and although he was furious, there was a look of defeat in his eyes. I put my hand over my heart, bowed my head, and said, "Koda Hafiz, my man, don't scare Santa." I watched to see if he'd understand, but there was no reaction. I shut the door and leaned back against it. Sasha looked at me, clearly exasperated. I told her what happened and we went to bed. I could hear them moving around on the porch a few times that night, but we managed to get some sleep. Christmas morning, we woke up feeling surprisingly rested. We played music, made coffee, exchanged gifts, cooked breakfast, and spent the day watching movies. That afternoon, Sasha told me she wanted to leave the ghosts a gift. It made me nervous. "I don't know, babe." She was insistent. "Why not? Why not try to show some goodwill? It's Christmas, Harry. They might not know that, but we do. Let's see how it goes." I reluctantly agreed and saw that she'd already planned it out. She pulled out a dish from the fridge, neatly arranging a small lamb kebab, some naan, 5 of her grandma's ramekins filled with pilau, a rice dish I recognized, and some dates. I was speechless. "Sash, when? How did you?" She cut me off. "I thought you might shut it down, so I looked up some Afghan food and made some." She shrugged with a smirk. "Tell me where they are, and I'll set it down for them. Maybe it'll remind them of home." We put on our coats and were heading outside when Sasha stopped, turned around, and brought Dash back inside. "Sorry, buddy, they don't think you're as handsome as everyone else does." I waited on the porch as she came back out, wearing one of her big scarves. She threw it over her head with a practiced motion, adjusting it carefully. I couldn't help but smile. "Sash, did you practice putting on a headscarf for this little Christmas gesture?" I teased. She gave me a look and replied, "It's not a hijab. It's more like a shayla, a headscarf." I chuckled, impressed, though it made me nervous. We'd take Dash up the county road every morning to wear him out, either on snowshoes or cross-country skis. The exercise definitely helped keep us sane. The ghosts would be at the door, trying to scare me, following us down the driveway. They'd stop at the property line, unable to cross off our land up the snowy road. I guess that was the boundary of their strange curse. They'd wait for us and follow us back up to the house. It became a kind of ritual. Whenever I'd step outside for any other reason, 1 or 2 of them would be waiting for me. They'd scream, then stalk me from the sides wherever I went, like wolves circling an injured elk. Bringing Dash along kept them at a distance a bit. The bad weather helped too. So cold and windy, it almost felt as harsh as their presence. Honestly, the days weren't too bad when I stayed inside with Sasha, just hanging out. But the nights? Those were the hardest. Between sunset and bedtime, I'd hear their whispers on the porch when I was in the kitchen, or see them sprint past the windows, or stand in the snowy yard, barely outside the porch lights, staring into the house with a venomous gaze. On the 26th, I went out to grab a charger from Sasha's car with Dash and my spotlight, expecting another run-in. It was dumping snow, silent, windless, with huge snowflakes drifting down in the eerie stillness. When I got to the car, I didn't spot any of them. I grabbed the charger and turned around, but froze as a flood of adrenaline hit me. "Bridger, He was standing on the tailgate of my truck, about 20 feet away, watching me with his arms crossed. He was positioned between me and the light from the shop door, the glow of the snowflakes making him look like a figure out of some dark myth. I bowed my head to him and shouted for Dash. It didn't take my eyes off him until I was back inside the fence, pushing the gate shut behind Dash. When I looked back from the front porch, he was gone. Around the 27th, they started hanging out below the bedroom, yelping, whooping, and wailing out of nowhere. It got more aggressive and frequent as the nights went on. By the night of the 29th, one had started running along the roof, sprinting the length of the house, while the others shrieked, gibbered, and moaned through the frozen night. They pounded on the siding of the house. We had a fan running to dull some of the noise, and I'd started sleeping with earplugs, but it was hard to get more than 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night. The nightly torment made me jumpier and more irritable during the day. On New Year's Eve, we were in full-on geriatric party mode, reading by the fire and drinking wine, when it sounded to me like a linebacker had crashed into the front door, and to Sasha, like someone had slapped it with a big open palm. Sasha jumped, putting her hand to her chest, while Dash went into a frenzy, barking and snarling at the door. I leapt to my feet. "What was that?" Sasha shouted. Exhausted and pissed, I slammed my boots on and rushed to the living room window. Creeps and Pete were standing on the porch, glaring at the door. The other 3 ghosts were hidden in the dark, snow-covered yard. I threw the door open and made a dramatic gesture, waving my arm across the porch as I let Dash tear outside, barking furiously into the night. "Looks like they want to play, Dash." Both ghosts took a quick step back. Pete shot me a glare full of icy anger, then backed up to the porch railing, watching Dash's targetless storm of snarls and snapping teeth. Without a word, he jumped over the railing and disappeared into the yard. Creeps held his ground. I gestured toward Dash and took a step forward, raising my eyebrows. Creeps looked at the dog with disgust, but a flicker of fear crept into his expression, fighting against his fury. Dash, sensing it, grew still, lips curled back, eyes locked on Creeps. Then, with a low, deep growl, Dash tensed, preparing to strike. Creeps leaned toward Dash, screaming in a horrific, ear-splitting roar of pure rage and terror. The scream rattled my bones, and Dash snapped the leash as he exploded forward, rushing at Creeps. They both launched off the porch, with Dash chasing Creeps into the yard and the other ghosts scattered. We managed to get Dash back inside and calm him down, hoping it would keep them at bay for the night. But it didn't. Around 2 a.m., I was wrenched out of a deep sleep by an ear-piercing, otherworldly scream from outside our bedroom window. My heart raced as I sat straight up in bed. It was a beastly wail, primal and distorted. I got up, pulled the drapes aside just a few inches to look out, and froze, almost falling off the bed in terror. Right there, pressed against the window, were Creeps and Pete, their foreheads against the frost-covered glass, grinning maliciously with their teeth bared, eyes filled with deranged hatred. The shock was so overwhelming that I slammed my hand into the headboard in panic, shouting in rage and fear as I quickly shut the drape and stumbled away from the window. Sasha woke in a daze. "What is it, Harry? What's going on?" We sat there, huddled together at the foot of our own bed, as the ghosts shrieked and giggled outside the window. Some were right outside, others off in the pasture, and one ran along the roof, squealing for hours. It felt like my lowest point yet. I was shaking with dread, exhaustion, and raw anger. I hated them. I was glad I'd killed them. We pushed the bed to the other side of the room, checked the candles, and I half-napped in a lucid state until sunrise. New Year's Day. Day 12 of this nightmare, and the last day of our strange, hellish vacation. I was more exhausted than I'd been in years, both mentally and physically. Sasha was tired too, but still trying to stay upbeat. After breakfast, I went out to load up a sled with firewood. I was halfway done when Hank suddenly rose up from behind the pile. It shocked me more than anything they'd done in daylight so far. He rose slowly, mouth wide open, eyes rolled back, screaming as if he were in pain, like he was being eaten alive. The sound was so disturbing, I stumbled backwards, landing in the snow in shock. Hank crawled toward me, frantically scrambling over the woodpile, getting closer and closer until his face was inches from mine, screaming in frantic, incoherent gibberish. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to steady myself. I stood up, but Hank was right there, moving quickly to stay in front of me, no matter where I turned. My ears began to pound. The overwhelming sensation almost made it impossible to breathe. I screamed, "Fuck!" slamming a piece of firewood into the snow, tears welling in my eyes. I saw the victorious, maniacal grin on his face, and in a flash of panic, I abandoned the sled and sprinted back inside. Sasha had been watching from the living room window, and when I came back inside, she immediately hugged me. Her expression was empathetic, like the kind a mother might give to reassure you after a tough day. I was angry, embarrassed, exhausted, but too overwhelmed to show it. I just stood there, blank-faced, feeling drained and paralyzed. "I'm going to try," she said, breaking the silence. "We need the firewood, and I'm not staying inside while they try to scare me," she insisted, putting on her coat and gloves, then wrapping her Shayla scarf around her head with a confident smile and a thumbs up. Dash trotted ahead, and she stepped out. I stood at the window, watching. Hank, Pete, and Buck were in the yard, watching her as she walked down the path to the gate. For a moment, I thought they might jump out at her, scream, or rush her, but instead they just looked at each other like they were communicating silently. Then, they turned their icy, furious gaze back on me, standing where they were. "What the hell?" Sasha walked through the front gate, and that's when I saw him. Creeps. He was behind the truck, staring at her with a fierce, unyielding hatred. He glanced at me briefly and gave me a twisted grin before starting to follow her. My stomach churned, and I bolted for the front door. I threw it open, inhaled to yell for Sasha to watch out, but the words caught in my throat as Bridger appeared. He stepped out calmly from behind the woodshed, positioning himself between Sasha and Creeps. Creeps froze, seething with anger, his teeth clenched, his entire body trembling with rage. But he didn't move. Sasha had no idea what was happening. She kept loading firewood into the sled, completely unaware of the tense standoff unfolding in front of her. I stood there, dumbfounded. Was this really happening? Had Sasha's peace offering actually worked? As Sasha pulled the sled up the path, she passed between Bridger and Creeps. Creeps broke his stare from Bridger, and in a blur of movement, sprinted off into the pasture at inhuman speed. Bridger turned slowly, his gaze meeting mine. The calm expression was gone, replaced by a familiar look of judgment. He turned and walked up the hill, disappearing into the forest. Sasha reached the porch, smiling triumphantly. But then her expression changed when she saw the shock on my face. I looked over her head at Hank, Pete, and Buck, who were still in the yard. They were glaring at me with pure hatred, then slowly walked off toward the cottonwood trees. "Babe, what's going on?" Sasha asked, her voice filled with concern. I was still trying to process everything. I don't know what happened. Let's get the wood stacked, and I'll explain inside. Once we were inside, I told her everything. She was almost as shocked as I was at what we had just witnessed. I couldn't help but feel relief wash over me for the first time in weeks. Bridger, the leader, had taken some kind of interest in protecting Sasha. Creeps, on the other hand, clearly wasn't buying her peace offering, but having one ghost to deal with instead of 5 felt like a victory in itself. That afternoon, the winter storm kicked into full gear. It was hitting us with gale-force winds and up to 20 inches of snow, with the forecast promising clearer skies in the early hours of the next morning. I received an email from my boss telling everyone to work remotely until January 6. Part of me was relieved, knowing Sasha wouldn't be alone, but another part of me realized how much I was itching to get away for just one full day. That night, we lit the candles, watched a show for a while, and then settled at the counter to drink tea before bed. The blizzard outside was relentless. Just an hour earlier, I'd heard a tree fall in the woods above the house. The storm radar showed it was finally clearing, but it seemed determined to give us one last chaotic blow before moving on. The howling wind and creaking of the house made the atmosphere eerie, and Dash, who had been lying on the kitchen floor, raised his head to look around, sensing something. But honestly, the wind was a welcome distraction from the relentless noise of the ghosts. I stepped over Dash to put my teacup in the sink when suddenly all hell broke loose. A loud metallic pop from the kitchen door jerked our attention toward the porch. Instantly after the pop, A sharp, cold gust of wind screamed through the crack around the door, filling the kitchen with its icy breath. The door hadn't been fully shut, and the bolt had made a false click, leading us to think it was closed. The only thing keeping the door from blowing wide open was the flimsy little hook lock on the old screen door. In that split second, the wind poured into the room, so powerful it whipped into my face, making my hair fly back. Sasha and I locked eyes, panic reflected in both of our faces. We both turned to look at the candles on the island. The flames were getting sucked sideways like flags in a storm, the glass shields doing nothing to protect them from the intense wind. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as we watched the flames flicker and strain against the wind, and then one of the candles went out. At the same moment, we both moved. I shouted, "Get the lighter," as I started toward the door. But Sasha was already on it, diving across the counter to tear open the drawer. I was just a few steps away from the door when the small hook lock on the screen door snapped. Both doors exploded inward into the kitchen, and I threw myself at them, trying to slam them closed. I poured every bit of my strength into holding the doors shut with my shoulders as the wind howled louder. But that wasn't the only sound now. The ghosts were starting to scream. I glanced back at Sasha, who was hunched over the candles, braids of smoke rising from the extinguished wicks, twisting and curling around her head. She had already relit 2 of the candles, and was trying to light the third when something slammed into the door so hard. The shock reverberated through my body. Sasha looked up at me with wide eyes full of terror. "Light them!" I screamed, just as another forceful smash hit the door. The next strike was even stronger, and the doors cracked open a few inches before I slammed them shut again. Every muscle in my body burned from the effort. Dash was going wild, his eyes narrowed into a vicious glare as he snarled and growled like I'd never heard before, ready to lunge at whatever was outside. The panic and terror coursing through me had me grunting with exertion. Then, the door was hit again with such force that I was knocked back into a standing position. I looked out the small window in the door, and there, right on the other side, I locked eyes with Creeps. The others were behind him. But it was him, the one who was going to break through. This was it. Dan's voice echoed in my mind, "Keep the candles lit all night. If they go out, get them relit immediately, or fight to the death. There's nothing else you can do." This was it. A familiar sensation hit me, one I hadn't felt in a long time. It was that quiet acceptance that only comes at the very end, a kind of calm surrender to the chaos. It's not about giving up, but about connecting with the violence around you, almost a communion with it. It comes in those moments when everything is falling apart, when the noise is deafening, when your friends are screaming, when you can't move, and you're not sure if you even want to. It's that strange peace, when the panic of knowing you're about to die just fades into something else. Maybe these men had felt that too. Dash and I stood there, side by side, facing an ancient fury ready to break into our home. My wife was behind me, Dash's mama behind him. We were all poised, ready for whatever came through that door, muscles tense with anticipation. And then, Creep stepped back. He lowered his shoulder and, just like that, turned and ran off into the night. I felt it before Sasha said anything. "It's lit, they're all lit," she screamed. In an instant, the air pressure in the house shifted. It started faint, like a soft hum, but then it grew louder, like wind tearing through a tunnel, a pressure that seemed to come from the very heart of the house. The lights flickered, dimming until only the soft glow of the candles remained, and I felt like I was falling. The roar intensified, becoming a force so strong it felt like the house itself was about to explode. Then, without warning, the force released. It was like a huge gust of wind, heat, and electricity all at once, bursting outward, making the lights brighten and casting a ring of flickering light into the snowstorm. Relief hit me like a ton of bricks. Sasha and I collapsed, gasping for air as if we'd just surfaced from underwater. It was the feeling of the spirit leaving. We crawled into each other's arms, with Dash nestled between us, and stayed there until the storm finally calmed down. Sleep felt impossible after everything, but we got into bed around 3 a.m. Sasha fell asleep immediately, and I just sat there, rubbing Dash's back, thinking about how close it had come. Those bastards were nearly the end of us. I finally got up about a half hour before sunrise and made some coffee. I'd only managed about 5 hours of sleep over the last 72 hours, but I needed to check on things. I stepped outside with my coffee at sunrise. It was clear but bitterly cold, the kind of cold that bites immediately and doesn't let go. I was beyond tired, the kind of exhaustion where everything feels numb. As I stood there sipping my coffee, the whole situation started to feel almost absurd. These men I'd killed? Coming back to haunt me? That's what the spirit wanted? It was almost comical, in a tragic, messed up way. A hell of my own making. I walked around to the kitchen porch, and sure enough, there they were. The ghosts. All of them, gathered in the yard between the kitchen and the back gate. They weren't even looking at me. Instead, they were staring up at the mountains to the east, performing their strange, almost ritualistic behavior. Completely fixated. You'd think an ancient earth spirit would have outgrown this old, cliched performance after millennia. What a hack. Creeps was closest, about 30 feet away from the porch, standing near one of our raised garden beds. I decided to sneak up on him. I approached, standing just behind him. "What's so interesting up there?" I asked, trying to get a reaction. He flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. His jaw tightened. Was I bothering him? "What's so special about those mountains and trees?" I pressed, noticing his hands clenching into fists. He seemed like I was the annoying kid asking questions in class, but he wasn't just ignoring me, he was being affected by my words. I leaned in closer. "The mountains to the east, huh? Where the spirit's wrath comes from. What's it whispering in your ear, huh?" That was when he whipped around to face me. His glare was pure hate, and, surprisingly, tears were in his eyes. This ghost was on the verge of crying. I stood frozen, taken aback by his sudden shift. Then, without warning, he lunged toward me. His movements were deliberate, like a young man looking for a fight in the parking lot after last call. His fists were coming with him. My heart began to pound. I instinctively stepped back, bracing myself for impact. "He can't touch you. He can't touch you," I told myself. I tried to steady my nerves and hold my ground, but before I could say another word, he screamed at me. And it wasn't just any scream. It felt like it came from the depths of a storm. It was an ear-splitting, animalistic roar that rattled my bones. The force of it almost blinded me. I could taste the sound, feel it vibrating through my teeth, like they were about to shatter in my mouth. When it stopped, I realized I was lying in the snow. I blinked, disoriented, and looked up. Creeps was already walking away, his body still trembling. I didn't even fully process what had happened before he turned and disappeared into the yard. I glanced to my left and saw Bridger, still staring at the mountains in the distance. I watched him, waiting for any sign of movement, and when the sun finally crested the mountain, he turned his gaze to me. There was something different in his eyes. Despair, exhaustion, a sort of quiet surrender. It was the most emotion I had ever seen from him. It hit me then. Was the spirit torturing them too? Was it controlling their every move, pushing them to the edge of madness at sunrise and sunset? What the hell was going on? It hit me like a ton of bricks. Suddenly, everything clicked. Details, memories, all the things Joe had said, and everything I'd known deep down. How could I have been so blind? I stood up shakily, the weight of the realization sinking in. I walked to the shop, grabbed my tools, and started working without thinking. I cut 2 shapes out of plywood, spray-painted them black, then ripped a door off the cabinets and screwed the shapes onto it. I attached that to a 2x4, grabbed a sledgehammer, and rushed out into the yard. At the back gate, I got to work on the shed. I hammered away at the back wall, facing east toward the mountains, and drilled the 2x4 into the eaves of the shed, elevating the makeshift signs above the yard, visible to all. Inside, I grabbed the kitchen shears and moved the furniture off the rug Sasha's mom had given us. With a focused frenzy, I cut into the rug, barely hearing Sasha's questions from the bedroom. She came out, wrapped in a blanket, half asleep. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. "I'll explain in a bit," I said, cutting the rug with steady hands. When I was done, I bundled up my project and turned to her, grinning. She didn't smile back. "What the hell, Harry? You're scaring me! Talk to me," she urged. I kissed her and said, "Sash, I think I figured it out. Trust me, okay?" She looked exasperated, but nodded. I grabbed Dash and stormed back outside, heading toward the shed. I set everything up, moved tools and junk out of the way, and looked over my work with a feverish excitement. If this works, Dan and Joe will never believe it. At sunset, Sasha and I sat on the back porch wrapped in a wool blanket, sharing a cigarette. Dan, Lucy, and Joe sat next to us. Dash trotted around, looking for attention. Sasha, Dan, and Lucy sat in stunned silence for a full 5 minutes, laughing as they looked between me and the shed, speechless. They couldn't see it, but we could all feel it. Joe, though, didn't look as surprised. He turned to me and gave a slow nod. Hope that rage got buried with that hatchet, son. For the rest of the time the ghosts were there, they never bothered us again. They would walk to the shed together, just like clockwork, but they didn't interfere with us. It was peaceful. Then, one night, they just faded away. You see, after seeing creeps break down and scream at me, and then watching Bridger's confused, desperate expression, I realized I had been seeing things all wrong. I had missed a crucial detail. The shapes I'd cut out and painted on the cabinet door? A star and crescent moon. Inside the shed, I placed 5 rectangles of Sasha's mom's rug, facing east toward the mountains. It wasn't the spirit they were looking to in the east. It was their own ritual. A ritual I had unknowingly lived around for 2 years and simply forgotten. The ghosts weren't under the spirit's control. They were searching for their god. So, I built them a small mosque, and it seemed like that's where they found what they were looking for. For the first time in my life, my war felt over, and somehow it seemed like my ghosts felt the same.
Stories may end, but the fear remains. Subscribe to uncover more secrets hidden in the darkness. Until we meet again in the world of nightmarish shadows.